Good evening. I welcome you to the Town of Southbridge Public Hearing Tax Classification. This will be a public hearing to be conducted by the Town Council today, Monday, December 9th, 2019, 6:30 p.m. here in the Council Chamber. The public hearing will be held pursuant to Chapter 40, Section 56 on the adoption of a residential factor for tax purposes and the adoption of percentages of the local tax levy to be borne by each class of real and personal property. Any person wishing to speak will be given the opportunity to be heard. This meeting was originally posted for Monday, December 2nd, but due to the weather, that meeting was canceled. We reposted the public hearing to be held today. That was probably posted in a newspaper for general circulation. So with that, we'll have the Principal Assessor, Will Canoia. Good evening, Will.
Good evening, everyone. So basically, I'm just going to give an overview of what our tax rate and the various options are for this year. This is a public hearing, so anybody who wishes obviously can have their time to talk about it and ask questions and so forth. So there's some highlights under Proposition 2.5. So basically, our new growth, which is the new taxes that were added to the town based on new properties being developed, new subdivisions, new buildings, new personal property, business equipment. That has added $13,289,000 in value. So that allows the town to generate an additional $270,728 in property taxes without affecting the minimally affecting the existing taxpayers who were here previously. Of this new growth, let's see, 29.5% of it came from the residential class, and the remaining 70.1% came from the commercial, industrial, personal property classes. The town value this year has increased about $89 million to $1,126,306. And of that, 78.3% of that is made up of the residential class. That's similar to last year. I believe last year it was 78.0% was the residential class. The residential class has grown slightly more. Our tax levy this year is going to be $21,935,343. By the way, that's about $3,000 less than we had projected for you when we were at budget time. It's gone down slightly just due to some housekeeping errors with the math on it, but so that's an overall increase of $810,790 or 3.84%. If you subtract the new growth of the $270,728 we already talked about, that means after new growth, the change is $539,973 increase, or 2.56%. This year, under Proposition 2.5, the town has the ability to levy $22,630,908, but as I just said, we're only levying $21,935,343. So that means we're $695,565 below the levy limit. That's called the excess levy capacity. If the town had chosen to, it could have levied those additional dollars. So the town has a couple of options under Proposition 2.5 in the classification laws. We are allowed to grant a residential exemption. However, that exemption, what that does is you exempt a certain amount of the value of owner-occupied properties, but the entire residential class still needs to bear the same amount of the burden, so the residential tax rate increases. So under the residential exemption, the tax rate would increase for all residential properties. It shifts the burden from the lower valued homes to vacant land, higher priced homes, and non-resident homes, like vacation homes and so forth. So all vacant residential land is taxed at the higher rate. This works in communities with a large amount of vacation homes or non-occupied properties to shift the burden to. The places that do it, I'll just give you a few examples. Barnstable, Boston, Brookline, Cambridge, Chelsea, Concord, Nantucket, Provincetown, Watertown, Wellfleet. So in other words, places that have a lot of big apartment buildings or a lot of second homes, like the Cape type houses. So the town has that ability. Our Board of Assessors recommends we do not do that. We can also shift the burden of property taxes partially from the residential class to the commercial, industrial, personal property class. You can do it based on our percentage of residential property to commercial. You can shift up to 150% to the commercial class, but you can't lower the residential class lower than, this is some math here, to lower than 86.17%. So really what that kind of means is for every dollar you shift to the commercial from the residential class, you put about $4 to the commercial class. And again, our Board of Assessors recommends not to do that. And that's pretty much it. We had a detailed presentation at the council subcommittee where we talked a lot about this, and I'm going to give an overview of that during the council meeting, but that's pretty much it. I don't want to take up the time of the residents here, so.
Okay. And just to note for the record, for our recorder, there is a quorum of the town council present, with the only member being Councilor Manor, who is excused this evening due to illness. So, any questions from the public on the tax rate classification? Any comments from the public? All right. Seeing none, any councilors have any questions based on the presentation tonight? I do like to thank Will for the presentation that he did. It's actually a full council meeting of the whole, or special town council meeting. I'll get that lingo right, Council Adams, in which we had quite a bit of dialogue based on the tax rate and a lot of good discussion. That's been up, I believe, on the YouTube channel for the public to see, and we do have the presentation. So, is there anyone else during the public hearing process? Anyone else? Council Marquetti?
I just wanted to know what the tax rate will be.
Oh, I'm sorry. So at the moment, the way it calculates out, so the tax rate is a function of what the tax levy is going to be, which I talked about that a few minutes ago, $21,935,343. That's the amount of money we're raising, and to get the tax rate, you divide that by the taxable town value, which I mentioned earlier, $1,126,044,306. If you do the math, and I already did it for you, that comes out to a tax rate of, I know the number, I just can't see it. Oh. Thank you. Almost done. $19.48 per $1,000 evaluation. So to put that into perspective, last year's tax rate was $20.38. So the tax rate is actually going down by 90 cents this year over last year.
Any further questions? Go to Councilor Steves.
I am going to follow up on that one, actually, Will. One quick question. Do you know offhand what the highest and lowest tax rates we've had in your memory are?
Yeah. So actually I have a chart of it, but in the 1970s, our tax rates were in the $140 to $150 per thousands. Wow. That's crazy. But in the real modern era, I think from late 90s, maybe 1996, 97, until 2001, 2002, the tax rate in all 5 of those years was $15.78 per thousand. That doesn't mean everybody's taxes didn't go up each year. It's all a function of the valuation of the properties and the amount we spend. So $15.78 those years. I remember it went up to 16 something. In the years following that, it went all the way up to about $20 in the mid-2000s. In the early to mid-2000s, and then when property values in the last real estate boom started going really high, the tax rate fell, and I think it went down to like $12 or $11.78 one year. The amount of money people paid in taxes, though, was relatively stable, with an increase every year, but it was relatively stable. Just because the tax rate fell doesn't mean property taxes went down.
Right.
because it's a factor of those two things, those two numbers that I mentioned earlier, how we get there. So it's been in the area we're at right now for the last several years. Does that answer it?
Yeah, and also what, for the public's information, what options are there out there for people to reduce some of their taxes, regardless of what we do up here?
So there's a few. So the number one thing that my number one responsibility, and it's the assessors throughout the state, is we value the property at full and fair cash value. So we come up with an assessed value for all the properties, and we think, we do but in Southbridge they're close to 6,000. We try to do it as accurately as possible. So if you get a tax bill and your assessed value is whatever, let's call it $200,000, look at it. It's based on a model. If you look at your property record card, look at it and say, okay, wait a minute. They're saying I have central air conditioning. I don't. I only have it in this one room. So the point is, check the data. Check the data, check the measurements, check the amount of rooms, the number of bathrooms, and so forth. And if you recently had your house appraised, or you're selling it, or a neighbor has sold a house, and you don't think it's at full and fair cash value, let me know. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody. If you formally contest it, you can file an abatement application, and we'll look at it. We'll make sure that value is right. The value is right. So that's one way. It's based on your taxes are based on the valuation of the property times the tax rate. Another way is there are what's called exemptions available. You have to qualify under the law, but based on financial status and circumstances, age, disabled veteran status, there's money available. Again, you have to qualify under the law. And we have brochures. The brochure, I believe, is online. A phone call to me at any time. I'll go over anybody's status with them and try to help them qualify see if they qualify. So if you qualify for these exemptions, they can be anywhere from, I think the lowest one is $175 off your property taxes up to, it can vary, but up to $1,000 depending on, what you may qualify for. Okay. During a council meeting, I think I'm going to get into that a little bit more because I actually have a slide for it. But that's a great question. Really, the biggest thing is if you have any questions, call. My office is a very, very. My two clerks they love talking to people and helping people because you never know exactly who's falling through the cracks, and so we'll help you any way we can, answer questions or whatever you need.
Council Leather? Were you all set, Council? I apologize.
Thanks. I was saying thanks.
Will, thank you very much for the presentation, especially at subcommittee. Question, back in the day, in the 70s, you said the tax rate was $100 and something, and isn't that what triggered 2.5 in the first place, with the outrageous rates that were going over the top? I think we were in high school at that time.
Yeah, I wasn't paying that much attention to the tax rate back then, but you're 100% right. And I think in the subcommittee meeting, I actually talked about this. So my job is to appraise all property at full and fair cash value. That's what it is. And back during the 70s, what used to happen was assessors, based on political decisions made by their towns, were appraising properties at a factor of full and fair cash value. So in some places it was 50%, in some places it was 70% on the residential property. But what they were all doing, particularly in the cities, is they were taxing the commercial property at 100% and pushing that as far as they could go. So it kind of put higher taxes on the commercial tax base. Well, what happened with Prop 2.5 is, in the city of Boston, some of these big industrial properties sued Boston saying, hey, it's supposed to be at full and fair cash value. You're only at 70% for your houses or your condos or whatnot. So the city lost that lawsuit, and they had to go to full and fair cash value, as well as did most other communities. What happened then was, if you were raising the values of the houses from 50% to 100% of fair cash value, those taxes were going crazy, the commercials were staying the same. And so that's what caused the impetus for Prop 2.5, because the tax rates didn't go up. As people raised all those values, the tax rate actually fell. But again, and I've said this all the time, I don't care. Oh, I shouldn't say I don't care. The important thing is, what am I writing on that check? And so suddenly, when all of the residential values went back to full and fair cash value, those people were paying a lot of money, and that's when the Citizens for Limited Taxation and many other groups helped get the referendum and pushed Prop 2.5 through.
Just on top of that, the history, of taxation, nobody wants to pay more taxes, I get it. I'm not questioning the evaluation of the properties in Southbridge and how it climbed, and plus the progress in new construction stuff. And the rate is $19.48 per thousand. I understand that. What is the percentage that we are raising taxes this year?
Good question. So the tax levy this year over last year is going up a gross amount of $810,790 or 3.84%. But then, if you remember, I mentioned that new growth. So we're bringing in an additional $270,728 in new growth. The new growth is new houses and new things that weren't there last year. So if you subtract that, the amount of taxes to the existing taxpayers is approximately $539,973 or 2.56%.
2.56.
After new growth. The gross increase is at 3.84%.
Right. My thing is, Will, is since we're having such a growth, a burst of growth, plus on top of a burst of growth, we're getting, the evaluations are up in Southbridge, of course they're up everywhere. I question why we have to raise the tax, the 2.5%, when we have this other, I always looked at the taxes as two separate things. Here is the evaluation, which is going to bump, we're going to pay more money in taxes because of the value of our property. I understand that. That's actually a good thing. But then we're going to raise taxes on the person that's already here, another 2.5% on top of the growth. Am I correct in saying that?
I don't think so, because I don't think so. The increase in the values, assuming we raised the same amount of property taxes this year as we did last year, if we didn't increase the amount of taxes we were levying over last year, if the values doubled, the tax rate would fall in half and everyone would pay the same. So the values going up doesn't make anyone pay any more in property, I shouldn't say anyone, doesn't make the town in general pay any more in property tax. It shifts it around. I mean, if you're like this year, multifamily properties have become very, very hot. So their values have increased at a much faster and higher rate than other type of properties. So multifamilies, and you'll see it in the slide presentation I have later, but so multifamily properties are going to be paying quite a bit more than they did last year. By them paying quite a bit more, that means somebody else is paying a less of an increase or even a decrease over last year. So there's no increase in taxes by property values going up. That's what I want to point out. Just like and this happens every 10, 15 years, and it happened in 2008 and 2009, property values went down. That didn't mean anybody's taxes went down, because as property values went down, the way the math worked that I talked about a little while ago, the tax rate went up, and people paid about the same, and whatever increase that was increased in the budgets. So it's complicated, but
Now,
I just want to say, just because values go up doesn't mean people pay more.
And I know it's complicated, and I know that we answer to the voters, and they're always, why did you do this, why did you vote that? And that's why the discussion on the floor is not to just not say anything. I'd rather have all the questions asked,
Yep.
and then you can put it out on the floor for the viewers. But how often do we reevaluate everybody's property?
So great question. We do it every single year. Every single year it used to be you'd have to do a recertification by the state every 3 years. But in the interim years, we have to do that anyway. The state just doesn't come in and check all the numbers and go out to these properties and do data quality and all of that. But we do it every single year. And so the full revaluation with the state coming in and checking all our work used to be every 3 years. In the Municipal Modernization Act Governor Baker's administration put in, they changed a lot of outdated kind of things. That's one of them. So they wanted to get to because it cost a lot of money to do these revaluations. So they wanted to get to a 5-year cycle. And so they did it like in an interim. But this one right here that we just completed this year was 4 years. The next one is going to be 5 years, and 5 years after that. That's when the full recertification, the state comes in and looks at everything. But every single year we have to do the same work.
Is it a state law that we have to do that, or is it a local option to do that?
It's a state law.
That you have to evaluate every year?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All set, Council? Councilor Strong?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Will. Councilor Lazo asked several questions that I was going to ask, and I do understand the tax revenue and the money that it brings in generally for projects, for services, police, fire, so on and so forth, and they do serve a beneficial purpose to the town. Can you give us an average of what the average tax bill for a homeowner will be increasing?
Yeah. So I can. So the average single-family property after revaluing all the properties, the new value, the average value is $201,512, which means if you multiply that by the tax rate of 1948, that means the average single family in Southbridge will pay $3,925.46. That's the average. So some are much less, some are much more. Most of them kind of congregate in that area. That is an increase over last year of $147.10, or 3.89%. Okay, so during the full council meeting, I have a slide which will show all of this, because some classes, like condominiums this year, they did not appreciate in value anywhere near as much. So the average condominium is the tax bill is only going up by $13, or 0.75%. So that's less than the average. That's why the single families are going up a little bit more than the overall that I mentioned. Apartment buildings, over 4-unit apartment buildings, because they appreciated so much in value, the average tax bill on an apartment building is going up by $693, or 10.27%. So you have all of that spread, but overall the tax bill is going up. What Councilor Lazo asked me to begin with, I forget the number exactly, but it's 3-point-something%. Yeah, 3.84 is the amount we're raising more in property tax this year over last year, and the change after new growth is about 2.5%. But so each class of property changes every year. A certain type of property gets hot in the real estate market, they become more valuable, they start picking up a little bit more of the property tax. And it's all cyclical. Every year, it's almost predictable. You can see it you could see it over 20 years. So the big apartment buildings are the last ones to catch fire, and then all of a sudden they catch fire. Everybody wants to buy them, and you see the prices people are paying them for them, and you say, oh my goodness, I can't believe they're paying that. And then the economy gets a little tricky, and then they're the first to go down, and it's all cyclical.
Thanks, Will. Another question. Homeowners can go to the town assessor's office and they can request a copy of their tax card if they want to question their tax bill?
Good question. Yeah, they can come to our office and we'll give them a free copy of it's called a property record card, or they can go online through the town website. There's something on the homepage. It says Assessors Online Mapping or GIS Online Mapping. That brings up a map of the town of Southbridge. You can look at any particular one. You click it. You're looking at the map of all the parcels of Southbridge. You either put in an address, put in a name, or just kind of point and click it. I mean, if you put it on this building, 41 Elm Street, you click it, it's going to tell you the property is, I have no idea what it's worth, but it might say $2 million, and there's a couple of links out over that. One of them is to click a property record card, so you can get it right from online. But you can look on it from your computer or from your phone very easily.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more quick question. If I'm not mistaken, when you do your annual revaluations, you do them kind of at a random sampling, right? How do you decide which buildings to sample, and how do you balance, when you're doing the sampling, how do you balance the commercial properties and the residential properties?
The same way we do it in the recertification. Every property that sells is a comp.
Yeah.
So we go out there and visit it, and so if you have a property that it's an arm's length sale, and the only arm's length sales if you have a property that's sold for $200,000 and we're looking at our model and saying, okay, we only have that at $160,000. Why? So we adjust our model to make our assessment match the sale price. And you do this with hundreds of properties. And when you do that and you've statistically done all the verification to make sure that it's all valid, then you apply the model that you applied on your sale properties to all the non-sale properties, and that's how you do mass appraisal. It brings the non-sale properties up to where they should be based on the sale properties. That's how we do it every year. So how do we do it? You said, how do you check your properties? Every property that sells, we go out and visit. Every property that pulls out a building permit, we go out and visit. The state also mandates what's called a cyclical inspection, which means we have to visit every single property in town a minimum of once every, it used to be 9 years, they just changed it to once every 10 years. So of the 6,000 properties in Southbridge, once every 10 years, 10% of that is we visit about 600 properties to make sure they're accurate and so forth.
That Council Steve?
Yeah, and how do you balance when you're doing that kind of research and visiting properties, is it the same split for commercial properties as well?
It is, but with the commercial properties, you also value them using what's called the income approach.
Right.
So commercial, industrial properties, and apartment buildings. The income approach is an approach to value where you're looking at the numbers of what that property can generate in what's called net operating income. So what it can generate in income, what the expenses should be, it gives you net operating income. So we redo that on all the income properties every year as well. And that's how we do all of those commercial industrial. We do those every year as well. And how do we get that data? So every single year we mail out what's called an income and expense questionnaire to all income generating properties, and they have to fill them out. So they tell us what the rents are, what the vacancies are, and so forth. And that's how we get our data for that.
Okay, thank you.
Council Lazo?
Well, say the manager or the council recommended to not raise taxes. At what point, like we're talking a lot of numbers here, reval, 3.84, 2.56. Say we didn't want to raise it to the 2.56%. Where would you recommend a cut if you were a councilor and you wanted to cut taxes?
So that's an interesting question. So let me just point something out here. So the levy that we've come up with, it calculates out to the $21,935,343. Okay, that's $3,000 less than the levy that we told you what it was going to be back in May when you did all the budgets. So we're pretty good at projecting this. All the numbers we've talked about, at the time we were voting all the budgets, we told you what it was going to be, and it was actually a teeny bit higher than this. So of these two numbers, so the new growth part of it, look at it this way. So those are new houses with new kids in schools and so forth. That's new stuff that we have to pay for. So I don't really think we need to pull that part in. Then you get to the tax levy and the Prop 2.5 part, which says you can go up 2.5%. So you're going up 2.5%, and that's an increase. Of course it is. But what's inflation? I don't know what it is this year, but it wouldn't be unusual to say it's 2.5%. So with inflation being 2.5%, if inflation was 2.5%, it could be 3, it could be 2. I don't know what it is. It's in that ballpark. I don't know the exact number. But what that means is, if inflation was 2.5% and we're raising taxes 2.5%, we're literally level then for the same services. And you also have to remember, most of the money that we spend is kind of non-discretionary. It's schools, that's a huge part of our budget, and the other labor agreements, union agreements and so forth. I mean, I suppose you could say no raises, we're not going to give it to you, but I don't think that's really feasible, because we're all in a competitive market where you lose people, and then you have to train new ones to replace them and so forth.
Well, I think one of the things is the question of how we spend money, where we spend money on the council side dictates what the actual money you need to pay for these things that we are pushing along down the road. Now, later on in the agenda of the council, we're going to put $125,000 from the overlay surplus to reduce the tax levy. Please explain to me how much that reduces that tax levy.
So the tax levy is $21,935,000. So 10%, 10% is $2,195,000. 1% is $219,000. So that's about a half of 1%, I think, is the rough math I could do on it here like this. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions on the public hearing side? Anyone else from the public that has come in? Seeing none, we're all set. I adjourn this public hearing at 7:03 PM, and we'll move into the council meeting. Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I'd
Council.
just like to wish the assessor happy birthday.
Oh, it's his birthday?
So if I could comment on that, we have a 3-member board of assessors, and one of my other members, it's her birthday today as well.
Oh, there you go.
So Diane, so small one. And as I made a joke to a few of you earlier, it's not really my birthday, it's my 40th anniversary of an important birthday years ago, of my 21st birthday.
Thank you, Will. All right, so we've adjourned are you ready to start the council meeting? Do you need to do anything in the cable? You all set? Okay. Call this meeting to order the town council of Monday, December 9th, 2019 at 7:04 PM. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Counselor Adams?
Present.
Counselor Catrona?
Present.
Counselor Daniel?
Present.
Counselor Jovan?
Present.
Counselor Lazo?
Present.
Counselor Manna?
Excused.
Counselor Marquetti?
Present.
Counselor Nash?
Present.
Counselor Steves?
Present.
We have a quorum. Subcommittee, consider and accept town council minutes of Monday, November 18th, 2019. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Counselor Steves.
Just one quick thing, it's a minor thing, but it's item number 22. The second to last line there, it says, however, there are now timetables. There should be no timetables because it changes the complete meaning of the sentence.
Did you get that? Because I couldn't hear it.
You got that?
All
Okay.
right.
Missed that last meeting.
Anything else? Any other errors, corrections, or omissions?
Abstain.
Okay. All those in favor? Oppose? Abstain?
Abstain.
Counsel Lazo and Counsel Nash abstain. Subcommittee reports. General Government, Counsel Steves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have not had a meeting recently. However, we have one on Wednesday. It's a fairly long agenda, including a couple of appointments, a couple of transfers. We're going to start discussing we're going to discuss the hosted community agreement again for Green Meadows and amendments to the bylaws to create a wetlands protection bylaw. That's Wednesday at 6.
Thank you. Department of Public Works. Counsel Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, nothing to report short of our next meeting date will be Monday, December 18th. That meeting will post...
It's Monday, December 16th. Right?
16th, I'm sorry.
Thank
I
you.
wrote 18th.
Yep.
Thank you for the correction. I
Okay.
gotcha. And that is ahead of the town council meeting. Majority of that meeting will be to clean up outstanding meeting minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Education and Human Services, Counsel Lazo.
No report at this time. Our next meeting is Tuesday, December 10th, 6:30 in the Veterans Room. Thank you.
Planning and Development, Counsel Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a meeting on the 19th of November. Agenda item number 13 is on here tonight. It was a 4-0 vote in favor of. And our next meeting is tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. in the Veterans Room. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Protection of Person and Properties, Council Manager is not here. We do have a meeting scheduled for December 12th at 7 p.m. There's several items on the agenda. Council Manager will be unable to attend, so in her absence, I will be chairing that meeting. Curbside collection? Do you have anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have a meeting set up for January 7th. That's our next meeting at 3 o'clock in the Veterans Room. We are kind of finishing everything up right now. I'll be sitting down with Will tomorrow morning to discuss the financial side of the house, a few other things, and including transfer station that we worked with Casella on. Our last meeting was on the 26th of November. That's it.
Thank you. Chairman's announcements, a couple things. First, had the opportunity to attend the Bay Path Santa Breakfast this past weekend. It's Superintendent LaFlèche's last outing up there as the superintendent. It's well attended, great job by all. It's an educational foundation that they have up there. So it was a great event. Also, congratulations and well done to the Holiday Visions Group, former Chair Council Clements. That was a very nice event. Several councilors were there throughout, and thank them for all the hard work that they put into that event, all the citizens and kids and everybody that came out, and kudos to the police department for all the time that they spent during that event. Reminder, Cops and Kids Toy Drive is ongoing. There's time to apply. There's information on the police Facebook page. The police department has applications for anybody that needs any assistance in toys drives. They are still collecting toys. You can contact this. It's on Facebook. The Southbridge Credit Union is a partner. There's several restaurants in Sturbridge that are partners for that, so please help. And finally, received an email this morning from Superintendent LaFlèche at Bay Path Vocational Regional High School. A couple items. One, in regards to the Southbridge Dog Kennel Plumbing Board, which they received approval by the State Plumbing Board, which is kind of difficult sometimes to work with them, for the students to do the work in the dog kennel, which we thank them for that. He also wanted, and he had given me this information about a week ago, but formally, that the Bay Path School Committee has on their agenda tonight to vote to change the FY20 town assessments based on the final FY20 state budget. That change in assessments will result in a reduction, which is nice, which they did last year as well, of the Southbridge FY20 assessment by $31,814. As you recall, last year, a recommendation from council was to put that into town council reserves. I think that would probably be the way we should go this year, so that we have that money available in case of emergency. With that, that is all I have this evening. You can do that.
Okay, I just didn't know if you wanted that.
Town manager?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a lot to report other than what I gave you in my written report. I did have an opportunity to attend the bonfire for the Thanksgiving Day game. It was wonderful to see so many kids there. It was a great event, and I also had the opportunity after that to attend the Lions Club dinner that they did, and the chairman was at that dinner. I guess I'd say it's serving the people, serving meals. But it was a great event, and I was really proud to be part of it, in particular because the Lions Club, not only did they invite the Southbridge football team and the cheerleaders, but they also brought in the football players from the town of Webster, and I thought that was a tremendously class act. It was really, really nice. It was really about the tradition of the town, about the tradition of the Thanksgiving Day game. As you know, hundreds and over the years, thousands and thousands of people have attended those games, and it really was a testament to the kids who work hard all year long, or during the football season, the coaches and all the people involved in that. For the Lions Club to recognize that, I thought was just an absolutely terrific event. It made you feel good to be part of it, to be part of the town, and it was nice to see the Lions Club members all were serving all the people in attendance. So I congratulate the chairman for being part of that event, and that's all I have tonight to report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Citizens Forum, is there anyone from the audience who wishes to address the council? Anyone from the audience? Last call. Seeing none. Presentations, we'll move for a quick presentation by Will Canoia on the assessor's presentation. Again, we've had this presentation at a full council, special council meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just wanted a clarification. Are you going to have him present the whole thing, and then we can ask questions, or?
If there's any questions that you have, yes. He will go through the presentation that he's already done, just as a refresher to everybody here this evening. I've asked him to keep it as brief as possible because we've already heard it. And he went through a lot of this information in the public hearing, but it's our opportunity, again, to review any information and ask any questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And as Chairman Jovan said, we spent hours of this exact presentation at a subcommittee. So I'm not going to shortcut it, but I'm, and it's also going to be posted online for the taxpayers. We're passing out the slides right now, but I just don't want to drag on because you asked some very, very good questions, and I just don't want to repeat myself and so forth. But so this year, our Board of Assessors is happy to present this information. We've had a very stable Board of Assessors. I've been here doing this for 31 years. Fran Biscay has been doing it for, 27 years, and Diane, several years. So we're going to talk about what the options are under the classification, how we can either shift the burden on the tax rate or some of the other options. Let's see. The topics of discussion we're going to talk about, we've heard new growth, the revaluation we talked about, what the property values are, that excess levy capacity we've already talked about, what our levy limit is, and classification, and then tax-wise, how do we compare to other communities. So the new growth, and again, we talked about this at the public hearing, but what is it? How does it affect property taxes? How does it affect the levy limit? So basically, again, new houses add to it, new commercial buildings, new commercial property, new business property. If solar fields, when they put in solar panels, if somebody builds in a garage, that's new growth and so forth. And again, this shows you what we spoke about earlier. About 29% of our new growth this year comes from the residential class, and that means the other, 70.5 comes from the commercial industrial personal property class. And as you can see, we're going to raise an additional $270,000 this year based on that new growth. This just graphically illustrates the numbers. Our taxable town value. This year, as I said before, the taxable town value is $1,126,044,000. 78.3% of that is in the residential class, and the remainder is from the commercial, industrial, and personal property classes. And that's an increase of about $89 million over last year. This chart just displays those numbers a little more graphically. This chart right here shows what the trend has been over the last, 12 years. So in 2008, the residential class bore 83.6% of all the property taxes, the tax burden. And you can see that kind of went down a little bit in the early 2010s, 11, 12, and kind of stabilized around the 76%. And last year went up to 78%, and this year it's 78.3 is what the residential classes, the share they're carrying over the town. The revaluation and recertification we talked about, we have to do it every 5 years now. Makes sure all of our properties are at full and fair cash value. We use all the comparable arm's length sales from the prior year. Those are our comps and coming up with our values. And that ensures that the taxes are based on your proportional share of the town value. So that's kind of a weird concept, but if there are 10 houses in a town, they're all valued at $100,000, town value is $1 million, everybody pays 10%, they pay 10% of the tax levy because they own 10% of the town. And where it gets goofy is when, properties go up in value or down in value relative to their others. But that's why it's really important that you own, if you own a house that's worth $200,000, whatever that $200,000 is based on the proportion of the total town value, that's what you own of the town, and that's the portion of the property tax you pay. Revaluation, recertification. Councilor Lazo asked how we do that, and I just went over all of that, so I won't slow it down here. But we visit all the properties, we maintain all of the changes, and we try to make sure all of the values are correct. So this year, this is based on our revaluation this year, this is what happened to the property values in general. Single families appreciated about 8.4%. Condominiums went up about 4.2%. 2 and 3 families went up about 7.6%. The apartment buildings over 4 units went up in value about 14.2%. The land didn't change, that's why it's at 0%. There was no evidence that land appreciated in value. So the total residential class went up in value about 8.8%. The total commercial class went up about 6.6%, and the total industrial class went up about 8.2% over last year. And this changes every year. I mean, so you might say, oh God, two and three families, only 7.6%. Well, this year, that's somewhat moderate. Last year, they got clobbered. They were in double digits based on the sales. So it kind of, it has its ebbs and flows. So the tax levy, that's determined by all the voted appropriations and expenditures that you guys make during the course of the year at budget time, and it's also all the state and county charges. It's paid for by using the state aid and the reimbursements, local receipts, which means excise tax, fees, et cetera, permit fees, enterprise funds, the free cash that you apply, stabilization, any kind of transfers. The remainder is the tax levy. That's all the revenues minus all the revenues in total, whatever is left, that's the tax levy. So this year, the tax levy, again, is $21,935,000. Tax levy and the tax rate. So the tax levy is $21,935,000. The town value is $1,126,000. If you do the math on that, it divides to a tax rate of $19.48 per $1,000 valuation. And here's a comparison of this year to last year. So as you can see, the overall increase in property tax this year is $810,790. That's an increase, overall increase of 3.84% more than last year in the levy. Again, the new growth is $270,000, so if you remove that, the change after new growth is the $539,973, or 2.56%. That's not to say the tax levy didn't go up to $810,000, but that new growth, the new growth is new taxes paid by new buildings, new property owners, and so forth. What does Prop 2.5 say? It establishes what's called the levy ceiling, the levy limit, and the maximum allowable levy, and what is excess levy capacity. So the levy ceiling says that in any year, property taxes can't exceed 2.5% of the total taxable assessed value, which really, in layman terms, says the tax rate can't be higher than $25 per $1,000 valuation. For Southbridge, again, we talked about our total town value is $1,126,000,000. If you multiply that times 2.5%, that means the levy ceiling is $28,151,000. We have to be below that, which we are. The maximum allowable levy, this is really the crux of the matter. So to get this, you take last year's levy limit, you add the 2.5% that Prop 2.5 allows, you add the new growth, and that gives you the 2020 levy limit. To that, you add any voter-approved debt exclusions, and that gives you the 2020 maximum allowable tax levy, which you can't exceed. For Southbridge, last year's levy limit was $21,600,000. 2.5% increase is $540,000. And the new growth is the $270,000 that I talked about. So the levy limit this year is $22,413,899. In addition, the debt exclusion that I mentioned from Bay Path, the voters approved a few years ago, that adds an additional $217,000. So the maximum allowable levy for this year is $22,630,908. That's the amount we can't exceed under Prop 2.5. This chart right here shows what that maximum allowable levy is, and in the middle column you see the actual tax levy, which is the $21,935,000, and that yields an excess levy capacity of $695,565. That $695,000 under Prop 2.5, the town could have raised that much more in property taxes, but chose not to. Not chose not to, but the votes that you all did, and with all the estimates we gave you, that's how much we're not raising that we could under Prop 2.5. So there are a number of exemptions. There are a number of options under the classification laws. One of which is the residential exemption, and this allows a town to discount up to 35% of the average residential value to owner-occupied residential properties. What this does, the tax rate increases, though, for all residential properties, because that class has to still pay the same part of the burden And if you're exempting part of it, making some property value exempt, you have to raise the tax rate on the residential class to make up for that. What this does, it shifts the burden from the lower valued homes to vacant land, higher priced homes, and non-residence homes. Again, this is why I mentioned about a lot of places down the Cape and Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, where they have a lot of properties that are owned, but nobody lives there. They're summer homes and so forth. So all vacant residential land is taxed at the higher rate. This works in communities with a large amount of vacation homes or non-owner occupied properties to shift the burden to. The Board of Assessors strongly recommends against adoption of this exemption for a number of reasons. It just doesn't really, in our opinion, it doesn't fit Southbridge because it just doesn't fit. I can get in more of that if you'd like. These are the properties that have that residential exemption, and as you can see, I don't know which one is the closest to us, but there's nothing probably within 40, 50 miles, and the bulk of these are either on the outskirts of Boston or on the Cape or one of the islands. So classification factor, this is the other part of the options that are available. So the law requires the council to adopt a residential factor between 1 and the minimum residential factor. After you vote on the next 3 agenda items, there's a sheet that I have to pass around to you which explains that you were briefed on this, and I have to submit that to the Department of Revenue with the recap sheets. So the maximum shift, there can be a maximum shift of 50% to the CIP, the commercial, industrial, personal property classes. The minimum residential factor is 0.8617. What that means is if with the single tax rate, there's a factor of 1.0. If we were to shift to the maximum amount allowed by law, the residential class can pay no less than 0.861726, and that would make the commercial class at 1.5, and that's just based on the proportion of residential to commercial properties. So the council could adopt any factor between 1 and 0.861726. A factor of 1.0, each class will be taxed at the same rate, and I'll give some examples of shifts to the various classes. So this is kind of hard to see. You have it on the last page of your handouts I gave you. I'm going to go to the next slide. It's slightly bigger, but on the screen it's tough. But basically, with a single tax rate, a factor of 1, the average residential property this year is going to pay $39,2546. The average commercial is going to pay $10,733, and the average industrial is going to pay $11,318, all with a factor of 1. You can see above that there are various percentages of shift. We could do any amount, but to illustrate, the very top one says 50%, which is the maximum shift. So if we did that, the average single family would drop to $33.83, which is a difference of about $500 and something. But to do that, the average commercial would increase to $16,001, which is an increase of about $5,400. And the average industrial would increase from $11,318 to $16,009, which again is an increase of about $5,600, I think. So, or you could do anything in the middle. So this chart right here, and again, you have this one on the last page in your packet, either the last or the second to last. What this says is these are examples of the actual property taxes with a single tax rate for this year and showing any change from last year. Okay, so in the first column, the average condo the average tax bill is going to be $1,801. That's an increase of 0.75%. Okay, the average single family, the average tax bill is $3,925.46. That's an increase of 3.89%. Some will be more, some will be less. The average 2 and 3 family, the average tax bill is $3,496, increase of 2.74%. Vacant land, the average tax bill is $350, and that's a decrease of 6.88% or $25. The reason for that is we had, I think it was 9 large parcels of vacant land, the higher priced ones, that were removed from the land class and they went into a state program called Chapter 61. So that lowered the average value because they were some of the higher priced properties. So that lowered that just lowered the average value, which lowered the average tax bill from last year, and that's why it's gone down a little bit. Over 4-unit apartment buildings, the average tax bill is $7,443. That's an increase of $693, or 10.27%. As I mentioned earlier, the apartment buildings really took off in value over the last couple of years, and there's a shift of property tax to them. So some of that land, some of the property, the tax that the landowners, vacant land was paying, shifted to them. Some of the tax that condos were paying shifted to them. So the commercial, and I have two tables in here. I have a commercial, which is straightforward with the math, and the way the math works is you take up the total value of that class and you divide it by the number of parcels there. And then I put another column in this because the commercial class had something very unusual happen that I think is worth noting. So I put, there's a column there that says commercial adjusted as noted. And so I want to read what was adjusted on it because I think it's important. So there are this is in the commercial class. There are 6 parcels that were part of the Sacred Heart Church complex and a town-owned parcel that were formerly exempt and are now part of the taxable commercial class. Their values are relatively low, and they bring down the average commercial property value from last year. This distorts the average commercial parcel value and therefore the average commercial tax bill along with the change from last year. In addition, the commercial parcel located at 495 Main Street had the building demolished and is now land only. So it's still in the commercial class, but it doesn't have the building. So as all commercials parcels are listed in the single commercial tax class, which consists of only 204 total parcels, these 8 parcels distort the impact to the average commercial tax bill. To adjust for this and to allow a valid comparison to last year's average tax bill, I inserted the column with these parcels, where these parcels are removed from the comparison. So what does that all mean? So that means in this adjusted commercial class, removing those 8 parcels, and some of those parcels are valued at $10,000. If you include them, the average commercial value is $568,000, but if you put in a couple of $10,000 parcels, that distorts that down dramatically. So once you include that, the average commercial tax bill is going up $297, or 2.76%. And on the last column, industrial, the average tax bill is $11,318. That's an increase of 2.96% over last year, or $352. So that's that. So this map right here, I put this in. So the cities and towns that split their tax rate, predominantly they're eastern Massachusetts or around some of the urban centers. So I colored these in myself. The ones you see in the middle of the map are Worcester, Auburn, and to the north of that is Fitchburg. And to the left, you see Springfield, Holyoke, Chicopee, and I think it's West Springfield. In between that, central Massachusetts, there are no towns that have a split tax rate. So there are no towns there. There were a few that did. Webster had a split tax rate for many years, and over the last, I think, 10, 15 years, they've been slowly shifting away from the commercial class back to the single family, back to a single tax rate, and I believe it was last year they finally got there, so now they have a single tax rate. So Webster was one in the central Mass that had a split tax rate, but they don't any longer. Sturbridge had a split tax rate for a few years. I think they went to a split tax rate in 2009, and they converted back to a single tax rate in 2015. And the last one, that yellow property at north of Worcester, that's Fitchburg, they were moving towards a single tax rate, and at the subcommittee meeting, I mentioned this, they were trying to get to a single tax rate, didn't know if they'd be able to. Well, I think it was last week they voted to go to a single tax rate. So again, that one north at Fitchburg is no longer yellow, it's no longer a split tax rate. The reason I bring this up is The ones in the middle, those are our competitors when it comes to commercial and business and so forth. So somebody looking to come here, you know, you look at the competition and you say, okay, what does Southbridge have? Well, they get a single tax rate, they have water and sewer, that's great. They have a great workforce, that's great. Those are our pros. What are our cons? Well, we don't have 395 running through our town like some do. We don't have the Mass Pike, or we don't have 290. So those are the kind of things you have to weigh, but I just want to show what our competition is when it comes to a single tax rate versus a split tax rate. So classification factor, our board recommends a factor of 1.0, a single tax rate for all classes of properties. If you have questions, I can go into why, but other factors. And tax-wise, how do we compare to our neighbors? So according to statistics from the DOR last year, and where do I get this stuff? Councilor Joe Van, actually, he was saying, Will, he goes, all that information is available. It is. This is on the Department of Revenue website. You can look up any community, and if anything deviates from what I have here, it's because I made a mistake. But I usually double, triple, and quadruple check this, and I'm sure a lot of people do. But this information is available to citizens, councilors, anybody. But according to their statistics, the average single-family property tax bill statewide last year was $5,789. Our average tax bill last year was $3,778. So that means we're $2,011 less than, or 34% less than the state average. Last year, Southbridge ranked 265 out of the 332 analyzed communities in the state in regards to the smallest average single-family tax bill. That put us in the lowest 20.2% in terms of the average single-family tax burden statewide. So this year, FY 2020, at the projected tax rate of $19.48, the average single property tax bill will be $3,925. It takes a while, by the way, for the state to put all their info out, so I can't really get it. It's always historical. This chart right here just kind of shows, in green you see the state average, in red you see, maroon you see the Southbridge average over the last, 25 years, and so you can see that difference is actually expanded, you know, the difference from us and the state average. So this chart right here is important to note. So then you get into, okay, our tax rate is high, and it is. It is. I wish it was lower, but it's a factor based on the amount we spend and the property tax and the property values. So this is last year, keep in mind, because it's historic. But Southbridge last year, our tax rate was $20.38. Our average property value was $185,000, which meant our average tax bill was $37.78. Right below that, you have Sturbridge. Their tax rate is $19.15, a little lower, but their average property value is $294,000. So that means the average person pays $5,642, plus they also have a CPA, which is a surtax of an additional 3%. So the average person in Sturbridge is paying $2,000 more than Southbridge. Charlton, their tax rate is a little bit lower, $1,477, but the value is $281,000, which means the average person pays $4,162, again, higher. Auburn has a split tax rate, and the residential part of it is $1,842, but their average value, $263,000, comes to $4,844 a year. Dudley, their tax rate is $1,350, the average value is higher at $255,000. It still multiplies out to a lesser bill than us, but they don't have our services. And you see Webster, last year was $1,533, that single tax rate they finally got to, and the average tax bill is $4,033. Where their tax rate's a little bit higher, their value is slightly lower. Is that correct? Their value is slightly higher as well, so their average tax bill is higher. So I just put this in just so we all can get the idea. I wish our tax rates were lower. I really, really do. But it's the function of the math, and for me, the important thing that I always like to look at is, what do I write the check for? Because that's really what it comes down to in the end. So one of the councilors asked me about taxes. How can you lower your tax bill? There are a number of people who already get these, but I get phone calls, and there are people who are eligible who didn't know it, so I always like to say it. There are various exemptions. This top one gives $175 off your property tax. And if you qualify financially, and you have to be the proper age, over 70, or a widow or widower, you can get $175 off. The next one is an elderly person exemption. You have to be over 70, and the criteria is a little tighter than the top one, but you can get $500 off of your property tax. And by the way, the state reimburses us a lot of this based on a formula from many, many years ago. And some of the other exemptions, there's a blind exemption, there's a hardship exemption, there's a tax deferral, which is I think a good program, although very few people take advantage of it. It's a little bit like a reverse mortgage. You can elect not to pay your property taxes in that particular year, and the town will place a lien on the property, and when you sell it or you pass away in the years to come, you have to pay it back at that point. It's 5% interest, but it allows seniors not to have to pay any property tax if they can't afford it. And there's the Senior Tax Abatement Program, which is that senior tax work-off where you volunteer in various departments of the town and you can get a credit of $600 a year. We have a number of people who take advantage of that. As I said before, call me if you have any questions, if you want to talk about it. The number is 764-5404. We have a brochure online. If you come in, we'll give you the brochure. Everything is completely confidential. I never talk about anybody's assets in front of anybody. I take you into a private room and we can talk about it, and all your stuff is strictly confidential. It's not public record and can never be seen by anyone else. And that's it. That's the overview.
Okay. Questions? Councilor Marquetti?
I have several questions, actually. On chart number 3, you're showing the shifts, the different shifts.
Which one?
That's not truly accurate there, is it? Because I'm looking at the first line there, 10%.
Councilor Marquetti, I'm sorry. It's
Sorry.
very difficult to hear you on this end.
The 10% shift, for commercial, it's 21.43, but that's a 10% shift, but for the residents, that's only like a 2.77% shift, correct?
No. Remember how I had said earlier, based on the proportion of residential to commercial property, so to save every residential property $1, you have to shift $5. This is what the math works out to.
I'm not criticizing you, I'm just saying, actually, that's not 10% for residents. That's 2.77%. I'm not criticizing the numbers, that's what the numbers are, but in reality, that's not 10%, that's 2.77% shift to the residents.
If I may, I think I can answer that question now. Now I different tact. So if you go to the bottom where an example of a tax shift, 10% on the commercial industrial on the far right, that's the 10%, and I'll take your word for it if the math works out to the 2%, but that's what the 10% shift does.
Right. Again, I'm not criticizing you, I'm just pointing it out.
Yeah.
So really, if you wanted to get a true 10% shift, it would have to be about 30% shift for the residents to actually see closer to a 10% shift, I think. The way I'm looking at it. Just doing the numbers.
No, you're probably right, because the 10% is working out on the commercial part.
Right.
Because the residential class makes such a big portion of it, it's far lower there. So you are correct.
All right. Then I have some questions about those 8 commercial properties
Yep.
that you were talking about in chart 4.
Yep.
So could you tell me where each of these 8 parcels are located?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So I think 6 of them are the old Sacred Heart property. Sacred Heart has, I believe, 6 parcels. One of them is the church itself, and its value is, as a church, to build it is a fortune. What it's worth. So actually, let me back up just a hair. Those 6 properties were bought. They were on the market for a while. They were bought by a private developer. He paid $350,000 for all 6, which helps establish what their fair market value is. I mean, to build them, it would cost you $10 million, but that's what their value is. So those properties are the church, Right next door, you have the old rectory, which is a very obsolete building. It would cost a fortune to renovate. Next to that, you have, that was the church, you have the rectory, another building like that. Right next to that, and then you have two parcels of land only that are valued at $10,000 apiece. And then you have the old Brochu Street School, which is a part of that. I'm not sure the exact value on any of those, but I can tell you in the aggregate, I think they're about $450,000. In the aggregate, they're less than one average commercial property. So that's 6 of them. Where are the other 2? One of them is the 495 Main Street property across from the Wells Junior High School. It used to be called the Beechwood. So that was land, and it had a building on there valued. You have to forgive me, my memory isn't what it was. I used to be so precise I could pull any of this up, but I think the value with the building on it used to be the 495 or 595,000. You remove the building, and the land is worth a couple $100,000 approximately. And the last one, I'm just sorry, I just can't recall. It's a property the town had, I believe, when we sold. I just can't recall what it is.
So I was going to ask you who previously owned each property, but I think you answered that. And the previous valuation, you sort of answered that.
Yeah.
Could you tell me why the parcels were decreased in valuation?
Well, the 6 Sacred Heart properties, it's sort of like the Wells Junior High School property. When a property is there are 3 approaches to value. There's the market approach, which is based on sales. You know, you do that with single-family houses, multifamily houses, because you have a lot of sales. You have income-producing properties and use the income approach to value, which I talked about previously. You capitalize the net operating income, because that's what an investor will pay for that income. And then the third approach, which you apply to mostly to exempt buildings, like the town hall here. You use the cost approach, and that's how your insurance company would figure it. Because you don't have a lot of town halls that sell. You don't have a lot of Sacred Heart churches that sell. So previously they were exempt. We used the cost approach. But then the church decided to sell those buildings, and I believe they were on the market for a year, 2 years, even longer. And eventually the market equilibrium happened, and an investor, the price came down to a point where somebody actually bought it. So that's what those properties are worth, because as they are right now, I mean, what are you going to do with the church? Even if you want to keep it as a church, even if a church group bought it, they'd have to invest a lot of money in that to stabilize it. All of those buildings, the same thing. So, I mean, I don't know what the intent is for the investor on that. It may be to demolish them and use the land, but so that's why the value has gone down so much. There's so much economic and functional obsolescence in those buildings that just the buildings aren't worth very much.
And so you determined the value of those properties?
Yes.
The building on Main Street, that was demolished, and I went online on your database, and the building, you have it worth 0 because it's gone. So it's a vacant land right now.
Right.
But the land is worth something, I think about $79,000, something like that.
I honestly don't recall what the value is. Yeah, a commercial lot in that area has value, certainly. But it's not the same value it was last year.
But it's vacant land now.
Yeah.
Well, so why is it commercial and not vacant?
So that's a really good question. In the residential, everything we do is based on the state requirements. So when it comes to the residential class, if it's a single-family house, you value it as a single-family house, and it calculates into that average single-family. If it's a two-family house, the same thing. If the two-family house, if we have 200 of them and they're worth, I don't know, $50 million, it comes out to a value. Same thing with three-family, same thing with four-family, same thing with land. With the commercial class, the state has only one class. If it's a lot the size of the Diaz here, or if it's the Hotel Conference Center, there's only one class. So, and the way you come up with the average value is you take the total value and divide it by the number of parcels. That's why, in this particular case, I did that adjustment because I thought it was certainly warranted. If I didn't do that adjustment this year, I thought it would really distort from last year. That's why I did it. It's not typical, and that's why I'm going to the great pains to explain it and put it in here. But the commercial class is one class only. Again, a small piece of land or a hotel conference center. That's two parcels in the same class. That's all it is.
And you can't tell me where the town-owned parcel is?
I can't tell you what.
Where the town-owned parcel was located?
It's, I'm sorry, it's just escaping me. I mean, there's 6,000 here. I just
Was
can't
it
recall
Foster
which one.
Street, the water building?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Jovian.
Thanks, Councilor Daniel. He's the one that whispered in my ear.
So I should have known that.
And
But
you've indicated, oh, okay. You were
So
gonna
let
say
me answer
something?
that one. So the town-owned one, there was a property that was exempt. The town sold it at auction. We've been trying to sell it for about 10 years. We've had all kinds of appraisals on it and so forth. And the town at auction sold it for, I believe, 70, 80, or 90,000.
What's that?
No, it wasn't at auction. It was purchased through an RFP process.
Okay, through an RFP process, thank you. But we sold it for either 70, 80, or $90,000. That's how we come up with the value for it. And that's $70, $80, $90,000. And if the average value in that class is $500,000, you add one more to it, that distorts it for this year. I mean, next year I wouldn't do it on these properties because they're there, but this year there's a big distortion there, particularly with the Sacred Heart properties.
And you said there's a couple of properties that are not buildable. Why not?
At Sacred Heart? I'm not sure. They might not have enough land. They might be in the rear part of that complex, so they have no frontage, but they're separate parcels.
When the Sacred Heart Church was sold, I was looking at the story, and it was valued at $5.4 million in 2018, and the purchaser paid $325,000.
Okay.
But I went on your online database. The school on Brochu Street was worth $2 million last year. It's now worth $314,900.
Okay.
40 Charlton Street, which is a convent, it was worth $481,000 last year. This year it's worth $150,700. 52 Charlton Street, the church, last year it was worth $3 million. This year it's worth $238,900. And 52 Charlton Street, the rectory, last year it was worth $439,400. This year it's worth $154,000. So my question, why the big discrepancies in the assessed values?
I don't consider that a discrepancy. As I said before, those are exempt properties. They were valued based on the cost approach because you have to come up with a reasonable value for them. But now that they're no longer being used for that exempt purpose, and they're sold in the market, they're based on market forces. We have a sale here, and I think if you add up those numbers you gave, they'll add up to, I don't exactly
Less than $1 million, but...
Yeah, but that's considerably more than the person paid for them. And just to put a good example, so the Wells Junior High School building, that cost the town millions of dollars to renovate, and we were insuring it for millions of dollars. We're in the process of selling it, and we've tried really, really hard to sell it. We're finally just about there. And what is the sale price? $1 million?
$1.2 million.
Yeah, so it is what it is. I mean, that's the explanation.
Well, the realtor is turning them into the Sacred Heart properties. He's turning them into apartment buildings.
Yep.
And according to the article that I read, he wants to turn the church into some type of shopping center. So, I mean, it's not like, they're not exempt anymore. You said they were exempt. They were exempt in 2018 when they were sold, but in 2019, those were the values. And now this year, in 2020, they've gone way down.
Yeah, so they weren't taxable in 2019. When a property goes from exempt to taxable, in that particular year, they pay what's called the pro forma tax under the law. So they weren't taxable in that year. And that pro forma tax is laid out in the law, and basically it's the sale price times the tax rate times the portion of the year that it's taxable. It's laid out in the law. So when he does whatever he's got doing there, I mean, I love it. I can't wait to appraise that stuff when the work is done, but it's not done. So.
Okay. Thank you.
So just as a follow-up to Council Marquette's, and they're great questions, take a property like, let's talk about two properties. Foster Street, sold to a private investor. He is now going going to make that market rate apartments. So even though he bought it for $80,000, he throws 10 apartments or whatever it is into that building, the potential for that revenue, that value of that building is now going to go from $80,000 to maybe a $500,000, correct?
Exactly right.
And that's when it will be taxable.
At the
that point.
at its fair market value, yes.
Right. And the same with Wells, where Wells, yes, we're selling for 1.2. He's going to invest, I think, $4 to $5 million in that, I think it was, right? And then have how many apartments in that? That value is going to go up considerably.
Yeah,
correct?
it will definitely, based on the work that he does. But until he does the work, you can't value it that way.
Right. No, that's understandable. Anybody else? Council Steves?
Yeah, I've got two quick questions. One is actually a follow-up on what Mike asked about the vacant land thing. Just to clarify, if I understand it correctly, are you trying to say that property essentially was valued as basically nothing as vacant commercial land because it's zoned commercially? Would it be treated? I mean, is it because of our zoning, and that's why it was treated as commercial property, as opposed to vacant land, which is residential property otherwise?
Yeah, it's going to be valued as commercial land and commercial property at the commercial rates, but that one I don't believe is buildable because it's in the rear. I don't believe there's any frontage.
No, the 495 Main Street.
Oh, I'm
Beach
sorry.
Road.
Yeah, no, that's valued as commercial property.
Because it's zoned commercial.
Yeah, that hasn't changed. That's still commercial. But again, the value went down dramatically because we took away the building.
I know that. I understand. I just clarify this because it's zoned commercial. Okay. And the other question I had is, does new growth include the road work and similar repairs and maintenance the town itself does?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I couldn't.
Does new growth include road work and similar repairs the town itself does?
Road work, no.
Okay.
When we upgrade roads.
Yeah.
But road work can be, yes. So, for example,
But if somebody builds a subdivision road, it counts.
Yeah, like Wildberry and Canoyer Boulevard.
Yeah.
Every year they take another section and they pave it and make it. So the land that was there that didn't have a road, but it had the subdivision approval on it, we had it at a percentage, like maybe 30% of a buildable lot.
Right.
And then once they put in the pavement, we'll make that to 100%. So the value will jump from, I don't know, 12,000 to 30,000, a buildable lot, and that is new growth.
Oh, okay.
But when town does new work around town, no, that is not new growth.
Okay. Thanks.
You all set? Council Lazo?
Yeah, Will, I commend you on the job you're doing. I'm not a guy that really likes taxes, it's well known, and most people in government never saw a tax anything alike. So for myself, I sit back, I ask a question to the manager, what's in the enterprise fund? What's in the free cash? What's in the stabilization? What are the safe yields? I think where I'm coming from is, when you turn around and you look at a building commissioner's office that is piling money up through fee system, the Board of Health, fees like you can't believe on the citizens and the businesses. So it's not just, I'm raising your taxes 2.56. The cost of living in Southbridge overall by the government, with all of what's going on in the particular departments, when a building commissioner comes up and says, yeah, I got $560,000 in my fund. And the enterprise fund, I'm not sure exactly what's in there. There's another big piece of the tax dollars where we have to have a certain safe yield for our bonding issues. And as all this goes on, the taxpayer sits there and looks at that graph like we need more vehicles for employees. We need more benefits. We need various things on schools. And you see that tax thing go up and up and up. You did a fine job of doing comparables. And some of the cities and towns that you compared us to are probably not compatible. But it's what it is in the state of Massachusetts. We are a much poorer community than most communities that are out there. And with the fee system, which probably aggravates me more than the tax rate, because everybody just tolerates it and just pays it. And they give you a food fee, but you have a $1,200 common vic, which is the oldest food license. Then a new boy comes in, puts a $100 fee, then next year he makes a $200 fee. Then he creates an inspection fee. And then and then all of a sudden he goes into a business, and the business has to get $6,500 worth of engineering because the commissioner doesn't know what he's supposed to be looking at, but he wants to do a good job. So for myself, my frustration, and it's not with you or the assessors, you did a bang-up job on your presentation. I would never go for anything but a single tax rate. I've served before. I think it's fair and palatable for Southbridge and not create any problems on our industrial commercial parts. Maybe try and enhance other people to come into town to widen that base. But it's awfully frustrating because it's the cost of living in Southbridge for what we have that kind of concerns me. And most of the people get in their Southbridge bought cars and go to their other towns. It's just frustrating to be a counselor and listen, whether you're at the coffee shop or the hardware store or even in the town hall and they're coming in. It's a rough road for some of the people. And those are the people that I represent, and I just want to vent a little frustration, but also pay a compliment that what you did here tonight is very understandable, knowledgeable, and easy to vote on. Thank you.
Thank you, Will, for the presentation and, again, explaining in more detail as to commercial versus the residential. I know we had a lot of conversations about that last year and how it affects. And then we get to the point of the night where we have to set and adopt a single tax rate that, again, my good friend, Councilor Lazo, certainly speaks to that, and it's frustrating, because we do have to balance the needs of the community, and we do set the tax levy by our budget process. And I think that's the frustrating part, because while we have some input and we vet the budget, the way our government is set up to, that we can, how we pass a budget and the input, I think my perspective going into this budget season will be more of a top-down, what is our thoughts of what's palatable for increases for taxes, and how do we look at all town departments to get to that tax levy. And you are right, Division of Local Services I found a tremendous amount of information, and any council is to go onto that site, because you can pick towns, take a look at towns, pick your comparables of what you want to compare them to, and there's a wealth of information, such as revenues by source, levies and rates by class, receivables spending by function. So I look at this and I sit here going, as I prepared for this meeting, because Will has always been saying, because we always talk about Southbridge has the highest tax rate, which we can't get away from that because it is the highest tax rate, but then when you look at the average tax bill, we are among the lowest. And that, if you look at the communities surrounding us, and the ones that I took a look at were our surrounding partners, Charlton, Dudley, Oxford, Southbridge, Sturbridge. And granted, there's unique challenges to that. I think when we talk about budgets, it's interesting, and I think former town employees, financial experts that used to work here, used to talk about how much we rely on state aid. Our budget is made up of 38.1% state aid over the total budget. Our tax levy is the lowest among those communities at 31.9%. So when we look at the taxes that we put towards the resident, the burden's 31%. But we still have to manage those dollars. And then I take a look at, we have a $66 million budget. $66 billion. Comparable to, the next town closest to us is Oxford at $42 million. $24 million extra. And I think as we get through the budget season, and this all goes to tax rates, because we're going to talk about in the spring, the state's going to come up with a lot more state aid for schools. And then how do we balance the needs of the school district and be responsible to their school district while maintaining the appropriate taxes on our residents? Because when you delve into those dollars, what do we spend on schools is tremendous. We have a healthy stabilization account. We have healthy free cash. I look at I think when we went into this budget season responsibly, we looked at fire, police, our public safety. We looked at roads, how can we fix roads? And to that, we put some money into those departments. And you look at, if you just look at the numbers, which I asked the chiefs this year to put numbers in year-to-date, 8% increase in the total number of fire calls. So year-to-date, 3,600 fire calls for the town of Southbridge. That's a lot of fire EMS calls. Police calls for service through the last report, 35,971 for the town of Southbridge. Increase of 2,600 calls with no additional staff. We did put the budget into the staff, however, we couldn't get them hired. So we have money in the budget for those positions, but they're still not hired, so they're not even impacting that number that we have now. Kudos to the police department for being able to handle the amount of stuff they have to handle every day. So I think when we look at the budgets, that's the time with this council to really take a hard look at those numbers and departments and general government to see where, if any, adjustments can be made into those departments without sacrificing public safety, without sacrificing our roads, because we know all the roads need to be repaired. We put $100,000 into the roads. Just one quick question. I don't know if you can answer that or our finance director can answer that. When we talked tax levy and we came into the tax levy last year when we had our vote to appropriate funding, we had $100,000 for additional police officers. And the caveat to that was that when the school aid came in, that the agreement with the school district was that we were going to reduce the tax levy by $100,000 to further reduce that tax rate, which the school did sign off. We agreed to that. So I don't see a vote here to change what our vote to appropriate was for last year of $100,000 to that police budget. Where is that impacted in this tax levy?
I'm going to defer to Karen. She's
I
got,
figured you would, but I want to make sure that it's on the record that what we had proposed and what we had agreed to has actually been done.
Yes, how it works is, I believe that we estimate the levy to be $22,038,000 at the time. That was putting in the extra $100,000 for the police.
Okay.
Now it's gone back down to the $22,938 minus the little bit of adjustment. So that's where it is. There doesn't need to be a vote to adjust it.
Even though we voted to, I mean, when we do a document, we vote to raise and appropriate. So you just say, you just take that $100,000 off of what our motion was to raise and appropriate. So, I mean, you have pockets of tax money that we raise and appropriate. We have state aid, and we have other receipts. So our receipts for our school budget came in at $270, whatever it was, $6,000 more. So therefore, there has to be an offset of what we voted to raise and appropriate. That's my understanding of that, or does that, what we voted just doesn't matter?
Well, you didn't really, you didn't vote a tax levy. You voted the expenditures.
Okay, so is that, where does the vote to reduce that expenditure?
There is no reduction in expenditure. I don't,
Okay. So it just goes
You gave
into
the
the recap
100,000.
sheet
It's basically just a recalculation on the recap sheet for the revenues.
for revenues?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
all right. So that 100,000 has been accounted for somewhere in writing that you can forward to the council. That
otherwise-
last year's estimate was this is what our final
Yeah, otherwise your
numbers were.
tax levy after new growth wouldn't be 2.5%. I think it was closer to 3%.
2.7,
At that time, that's
2.8.
what it was.
I just want to make sure that
Yeah, if we look back into the budget books, that's what it was. And we said that if we got the extra money, that we would bring it back down, and we did.
Okay. Right. Councilor Lazo?
We, the council, drive the numbers. The assessors can take a budget that was prepared by the council and say, this is what you need, this is what you have to have. During that budget process and after that budget process, when money comes into the process through the state, We deal with that with recommendation of the manager, and then we make a decision. And we've often heard it's a balancing act. Number one, I've never voted against public safety in my life. I would always rather be safe than a swept street or maybe a teacher short in the school or something like that. Public safety has always been the priority in Southbridge, no matter who the manager was. But this is going to be my first budget process coming through. And my philosophy and my fellow colleague I've served with for a few years, the chairman, Mr. Jovan, knows there are the nice-to-haves and there are the have-to-haves. Now, when you look at Southbridge as a community, it had and still has a lot of assets, water, sewer, and all this here. What we've done in the last 20 years, it feed the hell out of everybody. Okay, in the water department, you can have a vacant building with no water running, and you're charging that person because the water is in front of it, and it was a local rule adopted back in the day. So it puts another fee on that person. Now, when you want somebody to refurbish a building, let's take the water company building. If we had somebody that knew how to refurbish that building in the town commissioner's office, this builder wouldn't be going to hell and back to try and refurbish the building. And that would go on the tax rolls, and as our assessor said, might have bought it at 80, but it might be worth $500,000 when it's done. And all of a sudden that goes on the tax rolls. This is all about the buildings that we were tearing down. Why are we tearing the buildings down, as some councilors said? Keep them on the rolls. It's about the revenue. Town managers by nature are revenue-driven managers. I've only met one or two that weren't revenue-driven. One was Florence Chandler, was not a revenue-driven. She was more of the mind of run leaner, run meaner, run efficient. And not just, hey, let's make sure we have enough for this and this and this and this. We'll find a way to pay for this. And that's what we have to do as councilors. We almost have to go back to the, is this nice to have or is this really a have to have? Do we really need an electrical plug vehicle out front of the town hall? I don't even know who uses them or what as a councilor, but I inherit what's here. And now what we do is we work on it. This upcoming budget, I'm looking forward to it. You know what we went through with the school money and this extra school money? We hired a dean of culture, not reading teachers, dean of culture. Now we're hiring getting rid of special ed and hiring a company to come into school and take care of our special ed, which is much more expensive than hiring a special ed teacher. These management decisions we don't control, but we do control the bottom line. I'll be damned if I cut a police officer because they're wasting our money in the schools. That's the kind of decisions I'm going to be loud and clear. Council, we got a job to do. And if I may look at one of my fellow councilors across the way, when he made a stunning statement on roads when I first got on the council, my fellow colleague was so right. It's easy to say to fix the road. Where are we going to get the money? I'm willing to sacrifice things. Don't do the balancing act. The balancing act is spreading the butter so thin on the bread that you're not accomplishing things the way you should. So to me, let's tackle some of these big issues. They're coming up. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying I'm going to be at the table and say, let's hit these roads and make that the priority. And some of the other things are going to have to suffer because the roads suffered long enough. But this is all a culmination of why Mr. Canoia is up here saying it's going to be 19.48, our rate. And this is what's going to happen. What he is saying, what he is doing is his job. What we need to do is a better job on how we spread the butter on the bread, accomplishing the mission of service to the public. And we are in a poor community. And why did this town depend on the state aid so much? Look at our demographics, look at our schools, look at the state mandates that they throw down your throat as a community. And then you'll understand why, if you want to put a state mandate on us here in Southbridge, put the money behind it and try and help us with these problems. You want to run the school district the way you want to run it? Have at it, it's all yours. You pay more for it, not the taxpayer that thinks you're paying for great schools. So we have to work on that. I'm looking forward to work with all the councils. Thank you.
Any further questions, Council? Go ahead,
Thank you,
Councilor.
Mr. Chair. I'll just make it quick, just to Will. I had a lot of questions that were asked about how, I'll give you my place an example of how it increased quite a bit this year from last year. And, you know, from my understanding, from what you've educated me on, is it's based on, hey, this Colonial, the Colonials are selling at a higher price this year, but the ranch may be selling at a lower price. I don't think residents really understand that just because Steve and Larry are living right next to each other, their property value should be about the same, because it's not going to be the same. It all depends on the make, the year, the condition of the home. Can you explain that a little bit more to the residents?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. So the chart I have up right here summarizes the various classes. Single family up 8.4%. Okay, does that mean every single family went up 8.4%? No. Some people, I'm not going to make eye contact with them, but some people went up dramatically because the type of property they have, the market favored and priced it up somewhat. In addition, if you do work on your property, improve it and so forth, some people say, oh, you're punishing me for making my property nicer. No, that's not it. By law, we have to value them at full and fair cash value, and some type of I'll give you a good example. In a recession, in a downturn in the economy, capes tend to go up in value faster than other types of properties. Capes do, or they go down less in value in a really down market. Why is that? Because a cape is a better value. You get more living space for your buck. So at various times, capes will, you know, single families went up 8.4%. A certain type of property might have gone up 12, 13%. Another type of property might go up less than that. We're an aging population. A nice ranches are very, very popular. So different sectors of the market are valued differently by the real estate market. All we do is kind of mirror that real estate market. So Councilor Adams really brought up a good point. So 8.4%, that doesn't mean all single families. Some of them went up 4% or 3%. Some of them went up 10, 12, 15%. It's not it is how I value them, but I'm mirroring the real estate market. So that's a really good point. While I have the podium here, when we're done, after you do your vote, there's a form that I have to pass around for all your signatures, and it's just going to attest that you've had this information brought to you, a public hearing was held, and we have that excess levy capacity that we talked about. On the second page, could you all sign it and pass it around, and I'll collect it at the end. I have to send this into the state tomorrow when we submit our recap, or the next day. Okay. I'm sorry, did I answer the question?
So that answers the question. I just want to make note, I know you were probably looking at another counselor besides myself, but I will say that the assessor did stop by a house that we're selling, and what we're selling it for and what it was assessed at kind of caught up to each other. So I appreciate the visit. Thanks.
When I get out of the car, the look I got, but...
Yeah, like I didn't have the dogs. All right, we're good. Thanks.
So I just want to echo real briefly, I am the other counselor that, and I appreciate your office and the input that you gave me, Will. I really do. While I'm not happy, because, you know, I look at it, you know, we always talk about the taxpayer, we are all taxpayers up here. We all pay taxes. And regardless if I'm on Social Security or I have a salary, I have a fixed income. So it doesn't matter if I retired or I'm still employed, I still have a fixed income. I'm a salaried employee, it's fixed, that's it. I have to live within that budget. When I looked at, because Councilor Adams had said, my property value, I can't believe how much it went up, so I went on, because all this information is available through the town website, Vision Appraisal, I went up, and much to my shock, my property value is increasing 45%. So my tax bill is going up dramatically because of the value, and I was very upset because and I'm looking at my neighbors and saying, how come this went up only $10,000 and this one went, and mine went up $80,000? Well, your office and you particularly were very good at educating me in that. Any resident, I encourage them to go see you because you explained the whole process of fair appraisal, the market analysis. I cannot argue with it because I had my home appraised, and I had done repairs, upgrades as siding, new windows, a roof. The value went up, and what the town is assessing my property at currently is what it's appraised at. And if that's the number that we're using, and it's fair to everybody, then I might not be happy that my value went up that much, and I have to somehow pay this tax bill, but it's fair. The process itself on how you're evaluating properties was fair, so I commend you on that.
Thank you.
Any further comments on it? Councilor Nash?
Thank you, through you to the assessor. A lot of great comments up here tonight and questions. I love this time of year. Last year I went off on a tangent about condominiums and services and the comparisons, so I'm glad that was kind of addressed tonight. But one thing that was stated tonight, someone has a question on their assessment or their taxes, call your office, have a conversation, start that way. But Will, can you just touch on this? You touched on it briefly during the public hearing, but when it comes to actual abatement, what could one do if they weren't satisfied with a phone call or a visit in your office?
Yeah, so I'm not a czar or anything like that. When somebody comes in talking about their value, we talk about it. Is the information accurate? I show them the comps. Is the condition not what it appears to be? So we try to get information. I say, can I come look at the house and we'll take a look at it? I encourage people. A lot of times if I notice something isn't quite right, I'll say, file this abatement application. By law, that's the instrument for me to look at, for me to be able to deal with this tax bill. I can change things going for next year, but if there's a mistake for this year, you need to file an abatement because I can't change your tax bill unless you do. So sometimes I encourage people, but at a minimum, we'll go over it, we'll make sure we get it right. So then the question is, I think you asked me, do you get a lot of abatement applications? Not really, far less than other communities. So you asked me the question and I had my staff look it up. On average, in the last 5 years, we have fewer than 20 abatement applications, and I don't recall how many are granted or any adjustment is made. And sometimes it's just a minor adjustment. I go out there and I look at it, it's like, oh yeah, you only have 1.5 bathrooms. We thought you had 2.5. And, you know, it's almost like a mechanical thing. I want to correct this, we're going to do it. But so fewer than 20 people actually apply, which means we're pretty good. Most communities, I mean, let's talk to my co-parts in Dudley and Charlton and Webster and so forth. They're dealing with 50, 75. Our numbers are pretty good. Sort of like Councilor Jovan said, I may not like them, but I understand them and I know they're accurate. So our numbers are pretty good. But apply. But at the very least, come and talk to me about it. I mean, believe it or not, this stuff can be fun. And I like dealing with people. And maybe there's other ways I can help them do stuff. So. Just call my office and we'll be glad to talk to you and help you any way we can.
Absolutely, and just, I'm doing math in my head, that's 0.3% of the 6,000 properties actually go forward with abatement.
Plus or minus, yeah.
Give or take. All right, that to me is a very telling tale because I can tell you my first year I probably talked with more than 20 residents that complained, but I don't know of any of them that actually reached out to your office. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I can tell you there were enough people asking. So I'd like to think that you have a question, reach out to the assessor's office, have a conversation. So thank you for that. Otherwise, that's all for me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Councilor Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you, Will, for the work you've done. It's a tremendous amount of work, a lot of time, a lot of effort, you and your staff, and I appreciate what it is that you've been doing. As I look at the numbers on Chart 4, you're talking basically 2 or 3% increases, more or less. And then the over 4-unit apartments are up 10.27%. What came into play that was such an outlier? You explained the commercial property. What about the over 4 units?
So it's really not an outlier. Apartment buildings are usually the last, in Southbridge anyway, they're kind of the last to come to the party as things are appreciating. Then it becomes a frenzy. So in a cycle, apartment buildings are the first to go crash in value, go down in value like they did in 2007, 2008. And that contributed to a lot of the dilapidated properties that we're dealing with now. So people pay a lot for them, and when the values change, they're like the first to go down. And then they kind of struggle along at a stable value when single families start to creep up and so forth. And then all of a sudden, you can kind of see it if you follow the sales in the newspaper or in other markets. Suddenly, everybody wants to buy a multifamily. It's the key to getting rich. Actually, I'm a little flip with that. But everybody wants to own a multifamily because they see all the money being made, and they want to make sure they get in on it. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. People are just bidding up the multifamilies higher and higher, and that's why the values are going up, and that's why as their values go up faster than everyone else, they're picking up a portion of the property tax that other people paid. But did that kind of answer the question? I'm sorry, I got a little...
It does, thank you. Also, just to get a sense as to what we're talking about in terms of an over 4 unit, you're talking about a smaller building that has maybe just 4 units in it, and that's categorized the same as potentially what the Wells building will eventually be, or the Lensdale building will be eventually?
No, that's a great question. So we do it the way the state does it. The state uses 2 use codes. One's called 4 to 8 unit apartment building, and the other is over 8 unit apartment building. So they're separate, but the state on what's called the LA4, how we report this to the state, then combines it. They break it apart, then they combine it. And when all the numbers I have, I want them to be consistent with, as Councilor Jovan said, you go online, I want them to be consistent the way they are in Southbridge, the way they are in Boston, everywhere else. So there are 2 classes, 4 to 8 unit apartment buildings and then over 8 unit apartment buildings. Both classes went up dramatically in value, though. Okay. So for example, just to give you an example, I think Rosemead, their property taxes are going up, and that's, I think, 216 units. Their property taxes are going up over 10%. So, but people for a long time said, why aren't these are commercial properties, why aren't they paying more? Well, it's all based on the value. That's a residential property. People would call it a commercial. It's not. It's a residential. But now the market is catching up, and the taxes are being shifted to those apartment buildings again.
Okay, so even if you're a renter and you're not directly paying real estate tax, you potentially will be paying real estate tax.
Yeah, but in a couple of years ago, you didn't get a shift. The single-family property owner was picking up that part of it then, so that landlord wasn't really getting hit with it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any further questions? Councilor Steves?
Yeah, one quick one. You mentioned apartment buildings a second ago, and I was just curious, do you have any clear data or in your records about how many of these buildings that are sold, that are apartment buildings that are sold, are actually bought by actual human beings versus LLCs and investment companies and things like that?
Well, the 4 to 8 unit buildings, a lot more are owned by individuals. The larger ones, they're LLCs or realty trusts. But a lot of them are owned by, a lot of people, individuals will own a realty trust because it's a way, a realty trust is simply a way to insulate yourself from liability if somebody falls, sues you, and so forth. So there's nothing nefarious about it. It's just a legal method to protect yourself from being sued. But, isolating that asset from your other assets. But I don't have a number. I would say in the 4 to 8 unit, 50-50 on the larger ones. They're more some kind of corporate or trust entity.
Okay, thanks.
Anything further? Any further questions for Will? Well, Will, that went longer than we thought, but it was a great discussion, a healthy discussion, and a lot of good information, I think, for the public. So we have 2 presentations out there with a lot of conversation about tax rates, and hopefully, I know last year, after what's going to happen is whatever we do tonight, once those tax bills are going to come up, we will have a room full of 100 people again, like we did last year, all saying, why did my taxes go up? So I encourage people to watch these videos because, we did do our due diligence in conversations on this. It's unfortunate that, people don't come to these meetings when we actually have these dialogue, but it's out there, so I encourage people to pay attention to it. Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Item 9, vote to establish a tax classification factor of 1.0. Will, is this a percent? Is it still a percent, or is that a typo? Tax factor of
no, that percentage sign shouldn't be there.
Should not be there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Nash. He brought that to my attention. So, vote to establish a tax classification of 1.0 for tax purposes. The Board of Assessors recommends a yes vote for a single tax rate. Is there a motion?
Second.
Further discussion. Councilor Marquetti.
So I'm opposed to the Board of Assessors and the assessor's proposal to continue to apply a single tax rate to all classes of property in Southbridge, residential, commercial, and industrial. And I'll vote no on the assessor's proposal. I believe Southbridge should have a split tax rate, with higher taxes applied to, a higher tax rate applied to the commercial and industrial properties, and a lower tax rate applied to the residential properties. I propose a 30% shift in the tax rate, which would increase commercial and industrial property levies, tax levies from 19.48 to 25.33 per 1,000, and reduce residential property tax levies from 19.48 to 17.87 per $1,000 of evaluations. The residents of Southbridge really deserve a break in the cost of their property taxes. Recent increases have exceeded the ability for residents to pay for average wage earners, low and fixed income residents. This is the message that I receive from residents when I talk to them. They are looking for a tax fairness based on the ability to pay. Whenever I raise this issue, though, I get an argument from the assessor and the economic development director centered around the town's Economic Development Commission. Their principal argument is that we need a single tax rate to keep taxes low for commercial and industrial properties in order to attract new businesses to town. But yet when I ask for, on several occasions, I've asked for data to support that claim, and they can't provide it. That's because, in my opinion, this notion that if we keep the taxes low to promote economic growth, to benefit the average person, is just an old dogma that has really not been shown to bear fruit. So I set out for myself to find out some data on the economic growth in Southbridge. And I found a lot of data at the workforce, the Massachusetts Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, which tracks economic data for 351 cities and towns in the state. The Southbridge Economic Development Director should be familiar with that site because it is listed in the Southbridge Economic Development Plan of December 2016. And according to the data that I found on that website, the number of employment establishments in Southbridge increased from 554 to 764 between 2013 and 2018, which is an increase of nearly 40%. So new businesses are coming in, I can't deny that. But despite these increases in businesses, the average unemployment rate in Southbridge was twice as high as the average unemployment rate in the 5 surrounding towns: Sturbridge, Dudley, Charlton, Webster, and Oxford combined. So if the purpose of coddling commercial and industrial businesses is to provide more economic opportunity for the residents, it's not working. Perhaps we're attracting the wrong kinds of businesses. Maybe we need a different approach, one that would attract economic development that would actually produce jobs, good-paying jobs. Now, at the last meeting, I was informed that raising the tax levy on commercial establishments would hurt mom-and-pop operations. But I looked at Will's chart up there, and the average commercial assessed property value in Southbridge is $551,000. I don't think that's the average mom-and-pop property. So I looked at the database, and the lowest assessed property value in Southbridge is around $133,400. That's about the lowest that I could find. And I took the midway point between the average of $551,000 and $133,400, and I came up with about $204,000, maybe $205,000 for the average mom and pop. Now, using an average mom and pop assessed value of $205,000, a 30% shift in the tax levy would increase their taxes by about $1,200 a year, or less than $23 a week. I don't think that would significantly hurt a Southbridge mom and pop operation. So I would just like to finish by saying, Southbridge, we face a lot of fiscal issues now and in the future. We have infrastructure problems. Some councilors, we want to fix the roads, we need roads fixed. I agree. We need a new facilities like a fire station. We want money for the schools. We're going to have to find a way to pay for our curbside garbage pickup. So it's time that we set ourselves up to face these issues. So the first thing I would like to see is a local property tax system that residents can afford, and they will see that it's fair and they will support. And I think it should be based on the ability to pay. So that's why I think we need a split tax that requires commercial and industrial property owners to pay a 30% higher rate, while residential property owners would receive an 8.3% reduction in their tax. This will generate the revenue that we need without sacrifices, while assuring that a fair tax system based on the ability to pay. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none? Call for a roll call vote. Again, a yes vote will establish the tax classification of 1.0.
Counselor Adams?
Yes.
Counselor Catrona?
Yes.
Counselor Daniel?
Yes.
Counselor Jovan?
Yes.
Counselor Lazo?
Yes.
Counselor Marquetti?
No.
Counselor Nash?
Yes.
Counselor Steves?
Yes.
Motion carries. Item 10, vote to adopt varied classification of property for tax purposes, including open space discount and residential exemption. Board of Assessors recommends a no vote. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Councilor Steves?
Yes, we talked a lot about the whole residential exemption concept at the last special council meeting, and I still think that this is something that we as a town really ought to explore. Because
Should what? I
I
didn't
think it's
catch-
something that we as a town really ought to explore.
I'll explore. Okay.
I'm just kind of torn on whether or not we should be doing it this year, or as Will suggested, doing it, really look into it to plan it for next year. But I think it would help to do some of what Councilor Marquetti was suggesting, but it would still end up being a single tax rate overall. Okay, and I think that this is something that we have. I think that would take into account some of the concerns that I have had and you have had about landlord, absentee landlord-owned properties that just kind of sit there and that are in fact, I know that they're considered residential, but they are in fact commercial properties, and everybody knows it. And I think that was something that, and that's where I stand. I said a lot of that at the last meeting, so.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken. I think it does require some really in-depth study that we do before we get to tax rate classifications. We did explore it through your subcommittee. I think that was a great, healthy discussion, and through the special town council meeting. But it's something that we need to do more homework besides just throwing that out there, but something we could take a look at throughout the year.
Would it be appropriate to suggest a motion at this point to in this case vote no on number 10, but set it up right now that we will investigate it for next year?
I think
Does that make sense?
I'll just refer it, and I'm not sure we refer it back to your subcommittee for further study, that's all. So we adopted with a no, if it's a no vote this year, but it's clear that this is something that you want to explore. It's your subcommittee, then do it through your subcommittee. I don't think it needs a vote for that.
Okay. I was thinking
Respectfully,
I was thinking in sense of a vote, because the impression I got from when Will was making his presentation to the council as a whole, that I would think that that if we want to do this seriously for the next fiscal year, fiscal 21, then we would want, or for this, basically next December, then we would want, then I think what we're talking about is vote, I don't know when we would need to do it, to vote it to basically say that we want the assessor's office to be doing this, but not for this year. I'm not sure if I'm trying to, I think I know what I'm trying to say, but I'm not sure if I'm saying it the right way.
I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you want to do a residential exemption, but you want to put it off a year. And I'm saying, I think but your point was to more explore it and make sure we have more details before it. I wouldn't be comfortable saying, yes, I vote this no today, but next year I'm doing a residential exemption without a further study exactly of how this whole thing would shape up to the town. That's my personal opinion. Councilor Lazo, do you have a comment on that?
I kind of agree with Councilor Steves. I don't know if it's worth looking into. The example that he uses is very good. And I think that at this hour, I'm not sure that I would go against the Board of Assessors' recommendation, but I would love to open this up and bring Will in to find out what we can actually do under this classification change. On a variable. If it's a varied classification, I'm not really against it. I just don't know what the impact is.
Yeah. We had quite a bit of discussion about it at the meeting that you were unable to attend, but it does require more in-depth discussion.
Okay.
Because of where the break-even points are and all that. It was quite a lengthy discussion. Will?
So if I may, I would really urge you to vote on the agenda item as it is. That's specific language there we're going to send to the Department of Revenue for this year's tax rate. And I am more than happy to come and meet with you guys and talk about this in detail. At the Council of the Whole meeting, we did talk about it in some detail, and my personal opinion is that this is not something that applies to Southbridge. If you'd like, I could take 5 minutes and explain it to you, because if you weren't at that meeting, you may think that, oh, there is a way we can lower everybody's tax bills. And I'm not trying to offend. I've just seen what this would mean to a town like Southbridge. And even if it was saving me money, I think this would be a horrible fit for Southbridge. I don't think it would actually save most people money. I think it would cause a lot of distortion, mistrust, pitting one person against another, and I really don't believe it would save most people any measurable amount of money. If you'd like to, I have a couple of slides on it I'd be glad to show you. And they're the same ones I showed at the subcommittee meeting, just as a little overview, so we can understand what we're talking about. I'd be happy to. I don't want to.
Do you want to see that this evening, Councilor?
No, I'd rather, let's vote this tonight and then explore it in the upcoming year.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion? Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Counselor Catrona?
No.
Counselor Daniel?
No.
Counselor Jovan?
No.
Counselor Lazo?
No.
Counselor Marquetti?
No.
Counselor Nash?
No.
Counselor Steves?
No.
Counselor Adams?
No.
And again, Council, we can discuss setting that forward for further general government. Item 11, vote to adopt a single tax rate for all classes of property. The Board of Assessors recommends a yes vote. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Discussion. Councilor Marquetti.
So I already made my statement, and I'm going to stand behind what I said. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Again, the Board of Assessors recommends a yes vote. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Counselor Daniel?
Yes.
Counselor Jovan?
Yes.
Counselor Lazo?
Yes.
Counselor Marquetti?
No.
Counselor Nash?
Yes.
Counselor Steves?
Yes.
Counselor Adams?
Yes.
Counselor Catrona?
Yes.
Your motion carries. Vote to appropriate $125,000 from the overlay surplus to reduce the FY 2020 tax levy. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Discussion. Councilor Steves?
Yeah, through you to Will. How much money is actually in the overlay surplus right now?
I'd have to defer that to Karen. I don't know the exact amount. Do you know, Karen? The overlay surplus.
Overlay surplus.
Oh,
We're drawing 125,000 from it, so.
yeah. So Karen's right. It's kind of it's two different questions. So every year for abatements, we raise money. We raise money on the recap to pay for abatements and exemptions in that senior tax rebate program. Against that, so we raise it, we do whatever abatements and exemptions are there, and we also have to keep a balance against any appellate tax board cases, and also a balance against any unpaid real estate that aren't in tax title, or personal property taxes. So when we have money that isn't necessary for those liabilities, the Board of Assessors will release it to the overlay surplus account so that the town council can appropriate it. In this particular case, that's 125, right? It's $125,000 that's in the overlay surplus account. So in the various overlay accounts that have these liabilities against them, I'm not sure of the total. Yeah, Karen just said approximately $600,000. And that's what formally, remember I mentioned the Municipal Modernization Act? Previously, they were, in those various accounts, they were a liability against every fiscal year's, they were an asset against every fiscal year's liability. In that Modernization Act, the governor, the new law, put it into a combined one. So this is over all of our years. And as Karen said, it's approximately $600,000.
And at the end of this fiscal year, does that, the extra money that we don't appropriate tonight, does that just roll back into the general fund, or where does it go?
The money the money you're appropriating tonight is for this specific purpose.
Yeah, I know that.
And that's the only amount. So the Board of Assessors looks at it every single year, what we have and what liabilities are no longer there, and then we vote to release that to the overlay surplus account. It doesn't go to free cash until we vote that. It stays in that specific account against those liabilities.
No, I understand that. I'm just trying to clarify is that what I'm trying to understand is the way the overlays, so I'm not talking about the overlay surplus account, the overlay accounts themselves, they're independent of our general fund.
Yes,
They
totally.
are, okay.
Councilor Adams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real quick, so just to clarify, this goes towards the tax exemptions for this coming year?
Yeah, this part doesn't. What happens is on the recap, there's a number that's raised every year, which is called the abatements and exemptions. We have raised $175,000 for that every year since I have been here. I think it was actually $200,000 20 years ago, but we've reduced it based on not needing all of it. And the state kind of requires you to do an amount, and if you're going to be reducing it or changing it, you have to have evidence. So it's amounts that's raised every year, and if we don't use it for the exemptions and the abatements, it's returned to the general fund.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Oh, this is just a handbook?
Yeah. Opposed?
Abstain.
Abstain. Councilor Adams abstain. Do you want to send that over through? Vote to confirm the appointment of Carly Wilson to the Economic Development Commission effective immediately through June 30th, 2021 to fill a vacancy due to a member resignation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had an opportunity to meet with Carly. I think she's going to be a tremendous asset to our Economic Development Commission. Carly's in the banking field right now as a branch manager. As I'm sure most of you are aware, one of the things that branch managers do is they network, and they reach out to businesses all throughout the town. They provide loans to different businesses. It really is the kind of profession we want to be on an Economic Development Commission because they already know the business community very well. They know where potential growth areas are. Very outgoing. I think she's going to be a tremendous asset. And obviously, we're looking for people who are fighting for more economic development opportunities, and I think she's perfect for that role.
Any further discussion? Councilor Steves?
Yeah, Ron, how many, are there any vacancies remaining on this committee?
I'm told by the Economic Development Director that this is the last position.
Last one,
People
okay.
come and go, so you never know when you're going to get the next resignation.
Councilor Adams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so you know, went through P&D 4-0 vote.
Oh, sorry.
You got it.
Apologize. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous, all present. Item 14, vote to amend the agenda item 21 voted on November 4th, 2019 as follows. Vote to accept general laws, chapter 44, section 53F3 /4, which establishes a special revenue fund known as the PEG Access and Cable-Related Fund to reserve cable franchise fees and other cable-related revenues for appropriation to support PEG access services and oversight and renewal of the cable franchise agreement. The fund to begin operation for fiscal year 2021. That's a change from 2020 to 2021, which begins on July 1st, 2020. So the change is from 2019 to 2020. The Finance Director will transfer the balances of the cable access special revenue projects number 6626 and number 6627 as of June 30th, 2020 to the newly accepted receipts reserve for appropriation fund as of July 1st, 2020. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Any questions of Karen? She is here for that. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous of all present. Item 15, vote to appropriate $7,000 to the recruitment and processing account number 001910.534600 to be funded from local receipts to cover additional costs for FY 2020. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Council Steves?
Yeah, I understand why we're doing this now, but we also did something like this toward the end of the last fiscal year. And are we sure that this is going to be enough to actually cover what we need to do through the rest of this fiscal year? Because I think the last one was around $7,000 too, if I remember correctly.
According to, through you, Mr. Chairman, according to Cheryl, who works in my office, who keeps track of this will get us through the end of the year. So if the question was, if I heard you correctly, are we going to have enough to get us through this fiscal year, the answer is yes.
How much have we already spent out of this line item?
So I'll give you the note. The $4,000 will cover our current outstanding bills that are already in place. We requested $7,000 to cover us for the balance of fiscal year 2020, which is 7 more months. If we need to replace any police officers or firefighters, $3,000 would cover only 2 physicals. We're trying to look ahead rather than keep going back to council for more money as these officers and people come and go. Each physical runs about $1,200.
Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This agenda item, wasn't this brought up to Gen Gov and then it was either postponed or it was shot down or not recommended?
It was actually brought forward here, and then because Karen was away on vacation, how is this going to local receipts and not to a specific line item in the budget? So she can explain why it's going to go against local receipts as opposed to trying to transfer from other budgetary line items.
So when the request was put forward that we needed the $7,000, I took a look at the same time we were reorganizing for the recap, and I was looking at the local receipts and how the revenues came in, and I said instead of transferring it from another account, because we're only halfway through the fiscal year, that we can adjust the revenues for this small immaterial amount of the $7,000, we can still get everything to balance properly for fiscal year 20.
It's the shell game. Is there any further discussion?
What exactly is this for?
This is for, when we hire firefighters and police officers, they have to go for physicals
I see.
and testing. So if they have the physical, in order to go for the physical abilities test, which is mandated by the state, they have to get a physical, plus we have physicals, so that's what it is. And we did hire a lot of firefighters and police officers, so. And I think I did ask the police chief if this was all 4 of the original police officers they were already done, so he felt that he was comfortable with the number. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous, all present. All right. Councilor Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please excuse my intrusion here, but I would move to reconsider council vote to appropriate $125,000 from overlay surplus to reduce the fiscal year 2020 tax levy.
Motion to reconsider. There a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Thank you, and if I may,
For the purpose of discussion.
we should have a roll call.
Roll
on
call. I
appropriation.
figured that's what you wanted.
I just don't want to have any issues down the line.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, sir.
I thought after I said that, you probably should have done a roll call.
Yeah,
So.
thanks.
So the motion is to reconsider. All those in favor of reconsideration? Opposed? Unanimous, all present. So the motion is reconsidered. Vote to appropriate $125,000 from overlay surplus to reduce. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Okay. Am I doing this correctly, Mr. Parliamentarian?
Yeah, you're fine.
I'm fine? Okay. Roll call.
Don't we still have to technically make a motion again? I'll make that motion.
Was that?
It was motion to reconsider.
Right.
We voted the motion to reconsider.
Reconsider.
There is
So
a motion.
We're
on the floor
reconsidering
now.
the vote.
We're reconsidering the
Now
vote.
you're gonna change it by call for a roll call.
By
because
roll
we're
call.
trying to do the roll call vote instead of the
Yeah.
show of hands.
Right.
So I don't have to state another motion to move it, the question.
No.
It's just to reconsider the question.
The motion lies on the floor.
Floor,
with the
that's for
motion second.
reconsideration, yeah. Seeing none. All right. The question is reconsidered. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call. Madam Secretary.
Counselor Daniel?
Yes.
Counselor Jovan?
Yes.
Counselor Lazo? Counselor Lazo?
Yes.
Counselor Marquetti?
Yes.
Counselor Nash?
Yes.
Counselor Steves?
Yes.
Counselor Adams?
Abstain.
Counselor Catrona?
Can I even do that?
Yes.
President.
Okay.
I think it voted twice.
If anybody watches those hearings on the motion, I'm not taking it. I'm not taking it.
Mr. Chairman, would we like to do the same thing on item 15 since we did a hand vote?
Because it is local receipt,
Just because it's appropriation.
it's appropriation of local receipt.
I'll forego it, it's just a preference now. That's fine.
So, okay. I'll entertain your motion. I won't rule you out of order,
Thank you.
or that you're improper with that motion.
I'm okay with it. Thank you.
Okay. Council's forum. I'll start with Council Marquetti tonight.
Thank you. First of all, I want to talk about the International Club again. I got a call the other night from someone who said that the noise was so loud last weekend, the weekend before last, that it was shaking her house. And I asked her to call the police department, and she did, and I talked to the town manager about this, and I appreciate that you're looking into it. The only thing I'd like to say is, you know, I just feel like we're playing some kind of game here because, you know, I talked to the residents call me, I talked to the police chief. You gotta call the police. They tell me that they call the police. Police says you gotta talk to the liquor board. The liquor board tells us that we don't do it, you have to talk to the town manager. I talk to the town manager says you gotta call the police. So I feel like we're playing, you know, hide the thimble or something. You know, it's going round and round, and so I would just appreciate that something is done about it this time, because the noise is ridiculous. Sometimes I can hear it from my house. And if we got to look at the liquor board, then let's look at the liquor board, but let's do something about this. Obviously, there's a problem there.
Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you, and I want to thank Councilor Marquetti. He's obviously done a lot of work on this, and he's been responding very faithfully to concerns that residents have, and I appreciate that. You know, one of the things about that is I understand it, because I've been trying to follow the messages you sent to me, talking to the police chief, going back and forth through this. You know, one of the things that the police chief often needs is, when a resident complains, a little bit more information, a little bit more detail as to when they called and what the details were. Quite frankly, he was surprised with your initial response, because he didn't believe that any calls came into the department, and he asked you to provide a little more detail. And when you did, through the resident, he got the details, and he checked the phone records, and he checked to see what happened in that call. The chief and me have had a lot of conversations about that, because I think the residents have a legitimate complaint as to the noise issue there. And the police chief and I have discussed the response to that, and they have to physically go out and literally, what would be helpful is almost standing in the person's house to see what the noise level is and to see if that's considered. I wanted to thank you, Councilor Marquetti, because I know you actually worked with that resident to allow that to occur, where she's going to actually work with the police chief to allow a police officer to go and actually hear the noise level and the impact of that. We can't ticket the bar, restaurant, whatever you might want to call it, and find then if the noise level is more than what is considered reasonable. Again, I appreciate it, because we worked together, and I gave you the noise ordinance, and I asked anyone else to have the noise ordinance so they can understand what the process is. I'll say this to you, I think the chief is very concerned that residents are having issues, and is more than willing to have his officers issue fines if the noise is not appropriate. So, sometimes these take a little bit of time so that we understand the real problem, and our guys do it. But I know that the chief is committed to looking at your issue. And the reason he's committed is because you've raised it, and the residents have raised it to you. So I think, in the end, I think we'll see some gradual improvement and some changes made as a result of what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, in the end, I don't believe anybody can ever get a license to disturb the peace and quiet of a neighborhood like that. I've never heard of such a thing. So I also had some calls about the sidewalks downtown at the corner of Marcy and Main Street. There's some icing there and not shoveled out. That's right in front of one of those commercial properties. So I'd like you to take a look at that. And also some blocking of the intersections
Main
down.
Marcy? Okay, I'm sorry.
The blocking of the intersections downtown. A lot of people have been complaining about that. I've also run into that. You try to get out of Goddard Street, the cars are all blocking the intersection. The light has turned red. They go right in there, and they're sitting there, and you can't get anywhere. And I know that next summer, their plans are in the works to fix the lights downtown, but maybe we could get a head start on that because it's happening everywhere. Even on Main Street, you try to get out on Main Street, a lot of cars will be stuck in the intersection even though the lights are red. Appreciate it if we could look at that, maybe moving up the timetable on fixing the lights downtown. And finally, I just say I did attend the Holiday Vision celebration downtown last week, and it was really cold, but it looked like it was quite successful, and I just thought, congratulations to the people who put that on. So thank you. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Council. Council Adams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to caveat of what Councilor Marquetti said about Main Street and Goddard. I see it all the time. When I drive down Goddard or even Main Street, a lot of people just block the intersection right there. So if we can have a little bit more of a presence there to stop this from happening, usually especially during, around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Holiday Vision, I want to thank them for what they did. The VFW had 3 floats out there. We actually had 2, and then one of my guys threw his truck in, so we'll call it 3 floats. But it was cold out there, but we had Frozen as our theme, and I want to thank all those that dressed up for that. Councilor Lazo had brought up earlier about tearing down the properties and stuff like that. And that's an ongoing thing, and we had a nice discussion at the Planning and Development Subcommittee meeting last week about that. I think we made some headway with how we can work with the Redevelopment Authority. I do know we'll follow up probably in January with that, but along with some other items that we discussed that evening. But it was good to hear from the from the inspector, from the chair of the Redevelopment Authority, and all the other councilors and citizens that were part of it. And lastly, I'll be working with, that's all I have. I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
You're good.
Council Catrona?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, again, to echo my councilors just said, the Holiday Visions Parade, thanks to all the volunteers. The parade was a great success. The Santa, all the decorations, thanks to all the volunteers, great turnout for everyone. Just to talk a little bit about some of the discussion we had earlier, and I saved it for now, the town has to become more business friendly. We need to welcome new business, not deter business. By welcoming new business, we're going to generate new taxes for the town. And I think that's something that we, going forward, should really focus on. During the budget season this year, we are going to need to look at the numbers and tighten some of those numbers. It's not always going to be easy decisions that we have to make, but that's what we're here for. We answer to the residents, we answer to the taxpayers. So it's important for us as councilors, when we sit down for the budget this year, to look strong and hard at every number in every department. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Council. Council Steves?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One quick thing. First of all, 2 quick things. One, I just wanted to say thanks. Reiterate what people have said here about thanking people who are involved with Holiday Visions and some of the people who don't generally get mentioned, like Jill and Dan and Scott and some of the other people that were doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes that aren't right out in front and aren't like Denise standing here promoting it and stuff and whatnot. But that wouldn't be possible without them. I just wanted to point out that obviously we're going into the winter season, and with oil and gas and so forth being really expensive for a lot of people, we've talked a little bit about households not being able to make ends meet and so forth during the course of our tax discussion. I just wanted to point out that for people who qualify, the LIHEAP signups are at Jacob Edwards Library on Thursdays. You need to call the Worcester Community Action Council in Worcester to schedule times to do that. I don't have the number immediately on hand, but it occurred to me when I got here to mention it. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Nash?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I feel as though I've said enough in the last 2.5 years. I'm going to pass tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Wow.
Councilor Lazo?
Yeah, just a quick second. I don't want to repeat a lot of thank yous out there for all the volunteers. In summing it up, Southbridge is a good town and a lot of volunteers here. When you talk about the Lions Club, the 100th anniversary, the 100th year of the Bartlett-Southbridge rivalry, think about it. The NFL ranked up their 100th year this year. They started the NFL at the same time Bartlett started playing Southbridge. It's an old traditional thing. The throwback shirts were great. The alumni was at the game. You look at our Main Street, well decorated. Thank you to the Clements family and all the volunteers. The generosity in Southbridge never stops. But we as a government have to start thinking about being generous to the taxpayers. Jovan brought up a differential between Auburn and Southbridge. There's no need for it to be that way. It was made that way by councilors. Now, we are the leaders, and yes, the buck stops here. We need to continue in this upcoming budget session to really look at what we really need and what is essential to running the town of Southbridge, and not the nice-to-haves to make everybody else have a nice time, great career, all about the department head. It's not about the department heads. It's about the citizens of Southbridge. I sit here and I talk to many department heads, qualified and unqualified, but we work with them. But the thing is, a vision of a department head is a suggestion. We run the train. What street do you want to pave? Well, DPW director says, I want that one done. It's not her call. It's our call. She recommends, we'll confirm what we do. We answer to the taxpayers, and it's very important that we do that. On a positive note, on a negative start with a great finish, West Street School, we had the snowstorm. It ended at a terrible time. We have time to clean up the sidewalks. A grandmother called me and complained that the child had to walk to West Street in the road because the sidewalks were not shoveled. The phone call went to the police department, and believe it or not, ASAP, boom, those sidewalks were cleaned up and the kids were walking down the sidewalk. I commend the police department, DPW, whoever took care of that, but the grandmother was shocked that the kids had to walk in the street. And I think that's one of the bylaws are there, the help is there, the tools are there, and they got the job done. It's just one of those good stories during the holidays you like to hear that, the taxpayer said, thank you very much. Make some noise about this as far as complimenting the police department, but it was a job well done. Our department heads do a job on a daily basis. It's tough dealing with all of the issues. We are like a little city. We're not that country town, and we'll continue to work on it, but I really think that in the upcoming year, through budget session, we're going to need some heavy-duty priorities on what we are going to accomplish and direct the department heads to get it done. And if they can't get it done, then let's get somebody to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to echo Councilor Lazo and say that Southbridge is a good town, as evidenced by the wonderful last couple of weeks that we've had here with the holiday festivals and the Thanksgiving Day game, the bonfire the night before, which was very, very warm. You could feel it from literally up on Cole Ave. It was really roaring, but there was a good turnout, a good crowd, and I appreciate the fact that we had volunteers that were willing to support the kids to get that kind of a thing done. Those things are not forgotten. The kids remember that long after the event is over. The Holiday Visions Parade was wonderful. I brought my grandchildren here because they don't have things like that in their towns, which are nearby, and they loved it. They thought it was wonderful. They got to see Santa. The hot chocolate was great. Again, thank you to Denise for spearheading an effort with her volunteers that work with her. I think that it shows again that Southbridge does have people that care. And lastly, I'd like to thank the DPW for the job they did over the storm that we had last weekend. That was a 48-hour storm. It never really ended, and the fact that the roads were cleared routinely, cleared again and again, and down to bare pavement by literally Tuesday afternoon was something to be said for the work that they did. And I know that there were plows going by my house at 2:30 in the morning, so that I know that they put in their time and their effort, and I'm very grateful for that. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor.
Okay, the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Town Council is next Monday, December 16th at 7 p.m. here in Council Chambers.
Thank you. And I anticipate that should be a pretty robust agenda because all the subcommittees will be working this week with a subcommittee so that we can finish up, and that will be the last meeting of the year until the holidays. So I'd ask any subcommittee chairman not to schedule anything else with vacations till after the first of the year. Thank you. Entertain a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous, all present. Thank you. Have a
Good
good
night,
evening.
everybody.